This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Naruto Was Kidnapped at Birth. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Through the night came the sound of a baby's cries. In the arms of his mother, who was unconscious and unable to care for the baby, a blonde child cried. Konoha's yellow flash, Minato Namikaze, was standing above them. He gave his family a gentle smile, grateful that they were still living. Despite the fact that his battle with Madara was far from straightforward, he eventually prevailed. Madara's abrupt departure did seem strange to him, but he had little to complain about because his wife was still alive and his son was sealed in with the Kyuubi. He was at least relieved that his entire family was safe, even though he hoped to spare his son from the curse of harboring a chakra beast. He ordered his Anbu to go to the morgue and retrieve the victims of Madara's unplanned attack. He watched with sadness as Hiruzen and Bawako Sarutobi, his wife, were removed. Being a shinobi was a dangerous and unpredictable job, not only for the ninja but also for their families. He would have been the one dead on the ground if it weren't for Hiruzen. He commanded one of his clones to call a meeting of the clan heads, Konoha's council, and all other Jonins. Minato turned to look at Kushina as the clone nodded and walked away. Fearful of their child, he approached her and lifted her, holding her in his arms. "Little Naruto," Minato proudly remarked as he observed his son starting to settle down. "My son." Weakly, Kushina added, "Our son." Minato nodded and laughed quietly. As he sent the three to their house using Hiraishin, Minato said, "I'm sorry, our son." Naruto was upset by the use of the jutsu and sobbed aloud. Kushina let out a moan. Kushina muttered, "It's your turn to deal with him." She muttered something unintelligibly and then kept silent when Minato said, "He's in your arms." Minato's perspiration stopped. Kushina smiled as Minato clarified, "Fine. But I'm only doing this because you gave birth to him," Minato said to himself as he made his way to their bedroom. "Now she hears me." He watched as his wife rolled to her side, taking Naruto with her, after somehow using his foot to open the door and gently placing her on the bed. As she hummed a song and ran her fingers through his tiny blonde hairs, Kushina laid him down beside her, opening her eyes and grinning maternally. Kushina laughed and Minato teased, "I thought it was my turn?" As he lay on the opposite side of the bed, Minato grinned and Kushina taunted, "You had your chance, Daddy." He put his head on the pillow and stared at his wife. Minato was ecstatic just by the maternal way Kushina caressed her son. He pouted and said, "I get a second chance, though, right mommy?" Kushina nodded while keeping her gaze fixed on their child. She replied quietly, "You get no arguments from me." Minato laughed and began to follow Kushina's lead. Minato thought Naruto was grinning, and the softness of his hair seemed almost unreal. After a pause, Kushina said, "He's going to look like you." Minato grinned broadly. "No, he's going to have my hair, but other than that, he'll look like you," said Minato. He went on, "He'll probably act like you too." Kushina gently pressed her forehead to his. Kushina smiled and said, "I'm sorry, Naruto-chan." Minato lightly touched her cheek. Kushina gave Minato a playful blow to the head after Minato joked, "Why should you be sorry? With my hair and your looks, we'll need our best jutsus just to keep the girls away from him." He pouted playfully and asked, "What did I say?" She frowned and Minato laughed, saying, "He's too young to be thinking about girls. He's still my lil Naru-chan. My sweet, lovable baby boy." She looked at her son once more and said this with affection. She didn't notice Minato staring at her as though she had grown 2 angel wings because she was too preoccupied with her son. Kushina's violet eyes met Minato's azure ones as he whispered, "You're going to be an amazing mother to our child." Minato nodded his head in response to her question, "You think so?" He jeered, "Databane." Kushina grinned and closed her eyes wearily. She said drowsily, "I'll get you for that tomorrow." As he got out of bed, he said, "Until then, rest. We have a big day tomorrow, what with the welcoming party and all." Nodding, Kushina cradled Naruto in her arms while they slept in silence. Before leaving the room and entering the hallway, he gave his wife a tender yet affectionate kiss on the lips and kissed Naruto on the cheek. To avoid waking Kushina or Naruto, he cautiously shut the door. Another Minato emerged, making hand signals, and Minato gave it instructions to remain in order to protect his family. Then, with a lot on his mind, he made his way down the hall and to the front door. He was about to open the door when he heard a knock and saw Kakashi standing there. Kakashi bowed and greeted, "Minato. Sensei." Minato said, "Kakashi," as he passed. Kakashi nodded as Minato spoke rapidly and gravely, "Make it quick, I got a meeting to attend to." Just as swiftly, Kakashi said, "I wanted to see how you and Kushina are." Minato gave a thumbs up and nodded his head. Minato grinned and said, "We're fine. Naruto's great too." Kakashi's eyes also grinned. Minato stopped walking when Kakashi asked, "And Sandane? Sama?" Kakashi blinked as he observed his sensei reflecting solemnly and quietly. Minato turned his head slowly, his eyes fixed solemnly on Kakashi. Before continuing his stroll, he said, "He's not with us anymore." He felt his mood slightly deteriorate as sadness seeped into his heart. Unaware that Minato had gone on without him, Kakashi soon found himself walking in a different direction. A few minutes later, Kakashi sensed a presence a few feet ahead of him. Kakashi. Teme. Kakashi was shocked to see his best friend up at such a late hour. When Minato saw the Hokage tower, he shook off his melancholy and replaced it with a solemn, stoic expression. He proceeded through the hall and up the stairs before coming to a halt in front of the blue double doors. After inhaling deeply, he opened the door to reveal Kaharu Utatane and Homura Mitokado seated in a huge room behind their seats. They were seated next to a chair that separated them. On his way to his seat, Minato waved to the clan heads and Jonin who lived in the room. Homura asked, "What's going on, Minato?" But Minato ignored him, turning instead to face the Jonin and clan heads. The clan and Jonin heads nodded and said, "As you know, we were attacked by the Kyuubi, the nine-tailed fox. The battle was difficult, but in the end, it is no longer a threat to us." Minato shook his head when a random Jonin asked, "You managed to kill the demon?" They began to murmur to themselves when Minato told them, "Something like the Kyuubi is too much to handle, even for me. However, I managed to seal it in a human container so it would not roam free." Another Jonin said, "Why don't we kill the container?" There were a few murmurs of agreement before everyone was silenced by Minato's fist striking the table in front of him and the sensation of his intention to kill. That way, the Kyuubi dies with it. He yelled, "No," and scowled at everyone present. Killing the host will not kill the Kyuubi. It will only be released and all our hard work would go to waste. He grumbled. The heads of clans and Jonin said nothing. On top of that, "I won't allow anyone to kill my son." The room was filled with shocked looks and gasps. Heishi started, "So, what you're saying is," Minato nodded. He looked at everyone in the room and saw them all turn away. "That's right, my son is the Kyuubi's container. If anyone wants to kill my son, I suggest you go through me first." Shikaku, Choza, Inoichi, Sume, and Heishi, his friends, appeared to be on his side and did not harbor any animosity toward his son, Minato observed. Most of the Jonin, including Shibi, appeared to have no opinion on the matter. When Minato noticed a man with black hair approaching him, his eyes narrowed. The man's onyx eyes showed creases beneath them, and his hair was short and brown. He was dressed in a black shirt bearing the Konoha Military Police Force emblem, a black cloak with white diamonds on the bottom that ended just below his ankles, and the traditional ninja vest. His black eyes gazed at Minato's blue eyes with a challenge. The Kyuubi is a menace and a hazard to Konoha's safety. As leader of the Konoha Military Police Force, I propose we keep the child locked up and under constant supervision, Fugaku Uchiha stated. Minato glared at the second man who spoke, saying, "I second that." Danzo was an old war hawk who was constantly searching for possible future root members. Although Minato had not yet found the band group, he had a hunch that it was still active somewhere. "He is my son," Minato said, glaring at Fugaku and Danzo. "My wife and I defeated the Kyuubi together and helped seal it in my son. If he was a danger to the village, I would not be here." "As you said, he is your son, so how do we know you're not lying to us just to save your son's hide?" Danzo asked. A lot of people in the room relaxed as Minato said, "The Kyuubi was sealed within my son. The choice was heartbreaking, but I knew it had to be done. I sacrificed my son's future for the safety of this village because I am the Hokage. And I won't let anything obscure my duties. I give you my word, the Kyuubi will not be let loose in Konoha." Fukagu started to say, but was cut off. Minato yelled, "Silence!" and everyone fell silent. He looked around the room and saw no one attempting to argue, so he said, "The subject of my son and the Kyuubi is over." Not another word. Although he noticed some faces that appeared enraged by the news at the moment, Minato knew they wouldn't dare oppose him in any way. His voice grew harsh and solemn as he went on, "I've got more news." Some people recognized Minato right away when he said, "I know we've lost lives today, none of which can ever be replaced. However, today was the passing of an old comrade and a person who was like a grandfather to us all." Minato fought back a single tear as she said, "Hiruzen Sarutobi, the god of shinobi, the professor, passed away." Minato said, "Let us bow our head, not only to show respect for his passing but also of the others we've lost." Everyone followed suit. A few moments later, he looked up to see people staring at him. As he said, This meeting is adjourned. Several shinobi began to depart. The Ino, Shika, Cho approached him with a smile. For the first time since the start of the meeting, Minato smiled when Shikaku said, "So your son is finally born, troublesome." Minato nodded as Inoichi remarked, "Don't listen to him. Having a child is a blessing." Choza remarked, "Babies are expensive and they sure love to eat." Shikaku laughed. The four began to laugh when Shikaku remarked, "No, Choza. Yours just loves to eat. My kid just sleeps all the time. My troublesome wife has to wake him up just to feed him. Brad is too lazy to even wake up for food." He then turned to face Inoichi, another longtime friend. As the other man kept laughing, the first man blinked and said, "Yours probably never stops crying, am I right, Inoichi?" Choza said, "That's right, you did end up having a girl." Inoichi turned away. The others began to relax after he said, "I have nothing to be ashamed of." As Inoichi put it, she will be Konoha's best kunoichi. The four men turned to see Heishi approaching them and said, "I beg to differ." He was observing each of them with a stoic expression. The five men fell into a deadly silence before Minato began to laugh once more. "My daughter will be born in 2 months from now. She will give your daughter more than a challenge." Heishi grinned as Shikaku, Choza, and Inoichi trailed behind. They nodded when Heishi said, "It appears that the next generation will be an interesting group." Before Minato yawned, they were still chatting among themselves. Minato gave Shikaku a mild glare as he taunted, "Damn, the yellow flash is tired." Before departing and going home, Minato said, "Hopefully there won't be another attack." He went inside, scattered his clone, whose memories indicated that no one had attempted to harm his family, and got into bed. Kushina smiled as he watched her open a magenta eye and then close it. Kushina nodded as Minato touched her cheek and said, "I'm home." Minato smiled broadly as she muttered drowsily, "I love you." Before turning to face his son, he said, "I love you too." Before dozing off, he added, "And you as well, Naruto." As Minato's heartbeat quickened and icy perspiration trickled down his face, his eyes snapped open. His dream seemed very real. The images of his dreams replayed in his mind, and his heart grew heavy. Fortunately, he was forgetting some of the more graphic details of the dreams, so he shook his head. From his window, he could see the still night sky as his cerulean eyes scanned the room. But his clock indicated that dawn was approaching. When he turned around, his wife was gone, but his son was still sleeping peacefully. He rubbed his eyes and held himself up. He left the room after getting out of bed. He noticed a light emanating from the kitchen down the hall. His nostrils were suddenly assaulted by a delicious and seductive scent. Unsurprised, he followed it and saw Kushina standing over the stove. While giving his wife a back hug, Minato asked, "Why am I not surprised?" With a smile, she placed her left hand over his head. "You hungry?" she inquired, and Minato inhaled deeply. As she gave herself and Minato some salt ramen, Kushina chuckled and said, "Now I am." Naruto broke down in tears as they sat down at the table to eat. Kushina put a hand on Minato's shoulder to stop him from getting up. When she left the kitchen, she said, "I'll get him. It's okay." While waiting for her to return, he gazed longingly at the ramen. Abruptly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and his senses became sharp. Kushina's spine. Tingling cry, Minato, shattered the stillness of the night. With his heart racing, Minato leapt from his chair and hurried to his bedroom, where he found Kushina staring frightfully across the room. His eyes widened as he slowly turned them to the opposite side of the room. A masked man was standing close to the open window, clutching a kunai in one hand and his sobbing newborn child in the other. As the masked man brought the kunai over Naruto and stabbed him with it, Minato felt as though time had stopped. His sobs came to a sudden halt, and the room fell silent. Kushina trembled with fear and surprise, and Minato's eyes began to well up with tears. Minato could see a smile on the man's lips despite the mask. After years of training, Minato's reflexes allowed him to quickly retrieve his three-pronged kunai from his kunai pouch and hurl it at the man responsible for his son's death. The man sidestepped the kunai by turning his head. His eyes grew wide as Minato vanished. Taking the man by the collar, Minato yelled, "Bastard!" and hurled him out the window. The man rolled and came to a stop, and there was the sound of glass breaking. Minato leapt out to pursue him and dispatched 4 additional kunai. He flung them around, encircling the man. The man noticed more of the 3-pronged kunai as he looked around. When Minato employed the Hiraishin jutsu, the man was encircled by flashes of yellow light. Minato started chopping the man up from all sides and angles with a kunai. The man arose from the assaults and made his way to the ground when they eventually ceased. When the man's eyes finally opened, he saw Minato approaching him while holding a blue, spiraling ball of chakra in his right hand. Rasengan. Minato yelled as he struck the man's stomach with the Rasengan, drilling it into the ground and making the man make a crater beneath him. Minato stepped back, took a deep breath, and then the sorrow of losing his only son struck him. Tears escaped his eyes as he collapsed to his knees. He let out his frustration by calling forth another Rasengan and slamming it into the ground. A hand stopped him before he could repeat the action. He raised his head and glanced back at the violet eyes with his hard, cold ones. Minato-kun, Kushina sobbed while using her right hand to hold her side. Minato noticed that her white robe was stained with blood when she looked down. As she fell, Minato caught her and held her firmly, saying, Nar. She shook violently and wept in his chest. Minato sobbed in her shoulder while holding her as tightly as he could. It was the most agonizing pain he had ever experienced. He had trouble breathing and felt as though Tsunade had kicked him in the chest. He could tell his wife felt the same way by the way she sniffed and sobbed. Kushina yelled, "He killed my baby boy." Minato gave a solemn nod. After hearing Kushina's earlier scream, an Anbu team arrived and observed the surroundings. Minato managed to gather his thoughts long enough to gaze steely and icy at the four Anbu. The four nodded as one of them picked up the unconscious man and vanished, saying, "Get him to Ibiki." Now, then. When Minato returned his focus to his wife, he noticed that she was shivering. He carried her back inside the house after picking her up. Before she got up and left the room, he put her on the bed. She went to the living room and sat on the couch, and he followed her. She put her head on Minato's shoulder as he sat next to her. He noticed silent tears streaming down her cheeks as he looked down at her. He swiftly wiped away the tears that were silently streaming down his cheek. They sat swiftly without exchanging glances or words. They simply sat there until they nodded off. In the distance, a man grinned while holding a blonde baby in his right hand while it slept. He laughed as he glanced down at the infant. He sensed a second presence approaching and stopped laughing. He spun around and saw his leader's mask. As the man bowed as best he could with the child, two voices said at once, "Madara." Madara emerged from the darkness and peered down at Naruto. He focused on him, and his single Sharingan eye twitched a little. "The half-man smiled as Madara said, "So your mission was to abduct the Yondaime Hokage's only son, Zetsu?" As his white side laughed, Black Zetsu remarked, "That's correct." White Zetsu remarked, "It was really easy actually." Madara inquired, "What of your client?" White Zetsu chuckled, but his counterpart sneered. The black side spat out, "TCH, the fool was just cannon fodder." White Zetsu laughed and remarked, "Haha, what a baka." Zetsu stopped Madara as she was about to leave after saying, "Very well." White Zetsu nodded his head at Naruto and asked, "Didn't you come here for the Kyuubi?" Madara turned and Black Zetsu reprimanded, "Baka, shut up." Madara eyed Naruto once more and told them, "I did, but there's been a change in plans. Go, finish your mission. Report back to me when you've completed it." Zetsu nodded, then used his Venus fly trap. Like appendage to swallow Naruto and disappear into the earth. Madara started to walk and then headed to Kirigakure using his space time technique. He would need to get started quickly if he wanted his plans to start. In addition, he needed to find more recruits. With a silent Naruto in his hands, Zetsu strode down the hall grinning. He was now dressed as the man who had employed him. He would take a dead man's pay in addition to his own if he just showed up, gave his boss the baby, and was done. It was nice being a con artist. He knocked as he appeared in front of double doors. After waiting for a few seconds, he never received a response. He knocked once more, but nobody picked up. When he pushed the doors open and saw a huge room with a desk and a chair facing the door on the other side, he scoffed. Zetsu approached the desk and set Naruto on the tabletop. Grabbing the chair, he used enough force to turn it so that it faced him. The man in the chair awoke from his slumber with a startled yelp and a gasp. He looked at the man before him and blinked. He had a mask covering the lower half of his face and was dressed in a black jumpsuit. As his weary green eyes gazed at him, his brown hair appeared disheveled and disheveled. He put his black jumpsuit on top of his brown Iwagakure flak jacket. The man in front of him was glared at by the man seated in the chair. The man yelled, "What do you want, Haru?" Haru merely gazed at the individual. Among his facial features were a mustache with sharp corners and a triangular beard. He had thick, rectangular eyebrows and a large red nose. Although he had some white hair on the sides and back of his head, which was tied in a topknot with a yellow ribbon, the top of his head was completely bald. As Oonoki blinked, he saw a small child wrapped in a white, ragged blanket on his desk. "My apologies, Tsuchikage." Sama, but I have brought your package. Oonoki saw a word written on the blanket's side. The word, Naruto, was stitched on it as he turned his head slightly. Oonoki said, "This is the Yondaime Hokage's son," and Haru gave a nod. Oonoki looked at Naruto and said, "Yes sir." He then took out a suitcase. As he threw the suitcase at Haru, Oonoki questioned, "Here, this is what you wanted, right?" In one motion, he caught it and opened it. After a moment of silence, he nodded his head after taking a look inside. Haru noticed Oonoki shake his head when he said, "If you need anything else." "Very well. I shall go give the Akatsuki their pay." Haru simply left without saying anything more because Oonoki appeared to be lost in his own world with Naruto. After leaving his office, Haru immediately sank into the floor and vanished. Finally, he began, grinning twistedly as he raised Naruto into the air. As he watched Naruto open his blue eyes, he remarked, "I have the means of repaying your father back for all the shit he's put me through." Old man. Oonoki sighed, anticipating the sound of running outside his office. A small child rushed into the room after he waited a second longer. He wore a dark orange shirt and blank shorts, and his hair was short and silver. He had strange whisker marks on the sides of his face and bright blue eyes. Naruto was his name. "Old man, help," Naruto cried, leaning his back against the door and shutting it. A knock came a second later, and Oonoki arched an eyebrow. Hearing his granddaughter's voice, Oonoki sighed, "Open this door, Naruto-kun." He would never recall why he had introduced her to Naruto, but now he wished he hadn't. Kurotsuchi has only tormented Naruto since they were able to walk and speak. Without a doubt, they were close friends, but Oonoki could see that Naruto was at a stage in life where girls were only a nuisance. He laughed as he thought back to that time in his life. Naruto's voice was distressed as he said, "Help." With so much paperwork on his desk, Oonoki asked, a little stressed out, "What happened this time? I don't have time for this." Naruto responded hastily, and Oonoki only partially understood his response. "I tripped on my foot, fell, and made all of Kurotsuchi Chan's lunch fall to the floor." Keeping the door closed, Naruto exclaimed, "Now she's gonna kill me." Oonoki let out a sigh. "Come over here." Naruto swallowed as he got ready to run, and suddenly he was beside Oonoki when a young girl collapsed on the ground. She wore black shorts and a red shirt, and her hair was short and black. She looked up after blinking at her pink eyes. She stood and ran towards Naruto, but her grandfather stopped her by moving in front of him, saying, "You're dead, Naruto-kun." He screamed, "Stop this racket right now," and the two kids fell silent and motionless. Suddenly, both of them looked at the floor. Looking at Kurotsuchi, Oonoki noticed that she was flushed. He groaned and sat back down in his chair, rubbing his temples. When he looked back up and saw his granddaughter stealing glances at the silver-haired boy, he muttered, "I'm getting too old for this shit." The word, alive, was emphasized as he stated, "Kurotsuchi, I don't want to have repeat this in the future. I need Naruto alive." Kurotsuchi looked in a leftward direction. Oonoki arched an eyebrow as she muttered under her breath, "I wasn't really gonna kill him." He said, "Go home, Kurotsuchi." Before leaving the room, Kurotsuchi gave Naruto one final glance. Naruto pulled down his lower eyelid and stuck his tongue out. With a cough in his clenched fist, Oonoki exclaimed, "NYH," Naruto turned and stood alert. "As for you," Oonoki said as she stood and circled the desk. As he shut his office door, he said, "I need to have a word with you." He walked slowly back to his desk after turning. He faced Naruto as he stood in front of his desk. He simply kept his eyes on the ground. When Oonoki proudly remarked, "You are 7 now and one of Iwa's promising academy students. You are even strong enough to challenge a fresh genin and win. You don't see that a lot these days," Naruto finally smiled and looked into his eyes. "That's why," Oonoki went on, returning to his seat. Naruto's eyes widened as he said, "I'm going to spend more time training you." Naruto said, For real," and Oonoki nodded. When Oonoki added, "Not only me though," Naruto's eyebrow went up in perplexity. "Han and Roshi will be helping me as well." Naruto grinned and his eyes glowed like fireworks. Naruto asked with a hyperactive sense of eagerness, "Han.ni and Old Man Roshi? Really?" Then a question suddenly came to him, and it was gone. "Why?" he inquired, and Oonoki's expression darkened. Naruto glanced at his stomach as he replied, "We need you to learn how to use the Kyuubi." 2 years ago, he was informed about the Kyuubi that was sealed inside of him. It took him some time to come to terms with it. There were rumors that the Kyuubi had attacked Konoha and even killed it. Naruto was initially perplexed by that, but he simply shrugged it off when Oonoki clarified that it was actually a peace offering from Konoha. The thought of Konoha made him frown. The last shinobi war should have destroyed those peace-loving idiots. The Yondaime Hokage, however, was ultimately responsible for their victory. Naruto was annoyed by that man. Since Oonoki informed him that he was the cause of his parents' deaths, he had been Naruto's nemesis and a heartless murderer. Oonoki inquired, "Are you thinking about your parents?" He initially lied to Naruto without even thinking twice. Even though he was turning the Yondaime Hokage's son against him, he never felt bad about it. In fact, it made him feel refreshed. However, doing so has become increasingly difficult in recent years. At least intentionally. He sadly remarked, I didn't even get to see them." He wiped away his tears and said angrily, "It's all his fault." Oonoki said, "Easy, boy," and Naruto nodded and looked at him after taking a few deep breaths. Oonoki leaned forward and gestured for Naruto to approach, saying, "Now, the training will be hard and will push you to your limit. Emotionally, physically, and mentally, but, in the end, the results will be remarkable. By the end of the next 6 years, you'll be strong enough to participate in the Chunin exams." Naruto grinned broadly, and his eyes became bright. "You think so?" Oonoki asked, nodding before returning to his seat. Naruto gulped as Oonoki said gravely, "However, I'm gonna need you to be serious while we train." After some hesitation, Naruto nodded and Oonoki grinned, saying, "No jokes, no laughs." Naruto nodded and hurried out of the room, saying, "Good, now go look for Roshi. He'll start your training with the Kyuubi." Oonoki smiled sadly as he watched him go, then went back to his paperwork. "I see great things in your future, Naruto." 3 men were standing in front of the warehouse's double doors when he noticed a figure hiding behind a bush. To the average person, these men would appear preoccupied as they conversed among themselves. But he was aware that was not at all the case. He inhaled deeply and then smiled briefly. Then he put a mask over the lower half of his face. After giving the moon a brief glance, the figure leapt out from behind the bush and sped in the direction of the guards. The guards could hardly react before he was on top of them because the figure moved so quickly. The person attempting to kill them was hit in the eyes by the center guard's successful kunai throw. Just before the figure's face crumbled into pebbles, it had a shocked expression. The guards watched in disbelief because they had not anticipated it. Directly in front of the center guard, the figure dressed entirely in black slammed his elbow into the guard's face. Then the figure turned and punched the second guard in the stomach with his right foot. The figure grabbed his leg, spun, and threw him to the second guard when the third guard attempted to kick him in the face. The second guard was knocked unconscious and the third fell to the ground when both struck the wall behind them. The third guard was knocked unconscious when the figure leapt on top of him and slammed his right fist into his face. When he heard a sickening sound from the hit, he flinched, but he ignored it and carried out his plan. After eliminating the 3 guards, the figure entered the building and noticed that there were numerous guards present. Everywhere you looked were innumerable boxes, platforms, and levels. The building had 2 staircases leading to the second floor, one on each side. The figure stepped behind a box and heard footsteps approaching him. "Did you hear that?" he asked. The figure smirked as he flipped into the air and landed in front of the man, who was taller than him. The man blinked, but the figure leapt and gave him a knee to the gut before he could respond. The figure bent back and gave the man a bear hug as the man doubled over. The man went through the wall after the figure threw him back with his strength. The sound reverberated throughout the warehouse, and when the figure heard footsteps behind him, he realized his cover had been blown. "Don't move," the figure swore, feeling the tip of a kunai fall to his back. Arms raised, he was escorted through the warehouse. All the guards were staring at him angrily. With a sly smile, he slid aside and grabbed the man with the kunai, slamming his face into the box before him. The figure looked around as the man fell with a thump. "Get him!" shouted a man. A man was standing over him when the figure kicked his legs out and fell to the ground. As the other guards began tossing their shuriken and kunai, the figure snatched the man's kunai, stabbed him behind the neck, and fled into a cluster of boxes. A man standing atop a stack of boxes was struck in the middle of the chest by the figure's kunai. The figure struck 3 additional guards, 2 of whom were on the ground and 1 of whom was seated on the second floor, after taking out more kunai. The second floor one came loose and landed on approaching guards. He grabbed a kunai from the box beside him, pointed it at the light above him, and tossed it. The figure smirked as he heard footsteps abruptly stop in the middle of the darkness that enveloped that section of the warehouse. The sound of something flying through the air was the only sound the 4 guards heard before they perished. The sound of 4 bodies striking the ground without fanfare sent the other guards into a panic. A few guards emerged from the lower levels, and the figure leapt out of the shadows to kick the guard in front of the group. The 4 other guards were knocked down when the guard fell back. Grabbing one guard by the neck, the figure used his strength to pull the man through the floor and force him into a pillar that supported the level. The pillar did not fall, but everyone heard it crack. One of the guards attempted to attack him from behind, but the figure dodged and kicked the guard that was stuck to the broken pillar instead. The figure seized the startled guard and hurled him through the slender, fractured pillar, causing it to tilt and fall on him. After glancing at it for a moment, the figure jumped back and dodged a new guard's kick. He ascended the slanted platform, then leapt to the ground and delivered a roundhouse kick to a guard's face. Another emerged, snatched the collar of the new guard, and rolled onto his back. The guard was flipped into a wall by the monkey after he planted his feet on his stomach. He grinned and leapt to his feet. When a kunai dug into his shoulder, he growled, and the figure pulled the kunai out of his bleeding shoulder and threw it back at the guard who had thrown it before another could be thrown. In a matter of seconds, the wound healed. When an alarm went off, he swore and hurried to the closest door. Climbing up the wall, he gripped the red light flashing alarm. The door exploded open a second later, and 4 guards emerged, scanning the room in bewilderment. The figure landed between the 3 surviving guards after kicking one of them behind the head. Then he punched one of the guards, knocking him out of the door. The figure turned and fell just as the guard's legs were kicked out from under him and a punch nearly struck his head. The figure grabbed the guard's shirt and threw him into a box, breaking the box and knocking him unconscious as the guard fell. Too scared to turn around, the final guard stood in terror. After waiting for the guard to turn, the figure punched him. After catching it, the figure turned and thrust his elbow into the man's chin. The figure only needed that brief moment in the air to turn and kick him in the stomach, sending him hurtling into a heap of men who were unconscious. After scaling the wall and reaching the platform above him, the figure froze when 15 guards suddenly materialized. After running in the other direction, the figure leapt and grabbed onto a railing above him. He spun around and kicked the guards in the face who were chasing him. Just as more guards appeared, they fell off the platform and the figure swung himself to the next platform. 10 feet below them, he slid and knocked the guards off their feet, landing them on the ground. The figure turned and kicked another guard in the stomach with the same foot after standing facing the other guards and kicking one of them in the face with a sickening sound. He whirled around and pushed his left knee into a guard's face. As he was struck in the back of the head, the figure moaned. He rolled, appeared beneath the guard, put his hands firmly on the ground, and pushed himself up to kick the guard in the face using the momentum from the punch. The figure leapt to his feet, seized the airborne guard's feet, and hurled him at the guard who had just punched him. The figure ran between the other guards, stopping them as they caught up to it. He kicked a third person in the stomach, turned, sent a sharp palm to the face, and then, without turning around, kicked the person he had kneed in the face. Anticipating the next move, the figure flipped back just in time to be kicked in the chin by another guard. The next guard, still on his hands, was repeatedly kicked in the face by the figure before he collapsed, unconscious. The figure spun, stretching out his legs and effectively kicking each of the 3 guards in the face as they fell from the second story. After jumping and landing on another guard, he noticed more approaching him. A man doubled over as he rolled back, avoiding his punch, then rolled onto his feet and leapt up, punching him in the face and pushing his knee into his stomach. There was another crack. After escaping from a guard, the figure sprinted up a wall, flipped over, and slammed his knees into the man's shoulders. Leaping off the guard, he grabbed hold of the edge of a higher platform and flipped onto it, giving a guard a face kick that caused him to fall off. After landing on his butt, he turned to see other guards ascending the pillar that supported the platform. Just as he got to the top, he kicked a man in the face after sliding across the platform. He was about to thrust a kunai into the figure when the figure rolled back onto his hands and kicked his legs back, making contact with a guard. Suddenly there was silence. The figure was suddenly surrounded by roughly 30 guards. As he glanced around, the guards abruptly piled him. Feeling they had finally won, they kicked and punched the figure. Unfortunately, the figure was only enraged by this. Standing on a nearby platform, the figure observed the group, who were still not aware that he had swapped one of the guards for himself. With a quick smile, he snapped his fingers after giving the group a close look. Before placing both hands to the side of his mouth as though he were shouting, he made hand gestures. A tiny ball of fire erupted from his mouth and made its way toward the guards. The guards' eyes widened and their heads turned. The fireball went by them without incident, and they smirked as they parted ways. As the fireball struck the platform and burst into a firestorm, engulfing all the guards in its wake, the figure merely grinned. When it subsided, the figure emerged from behind a pillar. After looking around and determining that there were no more guards approaching, he ascended the closest stairs and leapt to the second floor. As he glanced around, he noticed that one guard was positioned atop the tallest stack of boxes, with the others dispersed throughout the space. A giant of a man stood 10 feet ahead of the figure, eyeing it with a sly smile. The figure narrowed his eyes as the man said, "We've been waiting for you." The giant, dressed in black pants and a green shirt, was 6 feet tall. His onyx eyes were confident, and he had brown hair. As the giant ran at the figure, the other guards nodded and said, "I get first dibs." The figure leapt and attempted to strike the giant, but the giant caught his fist and threw him through the closest box. After a swift recovery, the figure leapt onto the giant's back. When the giant landed on his back, the figure let out a cry of agony due to the weight of the man. He fled to a wall after writhing out from beneath the man. Running up it, he turned, kicked the giant man in the face, and pushed himself off the wall just as he was over him. The man kicked the figure in the stomach as soon as it landed, so it didn't really affect him. The giant grabbed the figure's neck and threw him to the guards before he could slide down the wall. He sped back to the giant and gave him a knee to the face after bursting through a box. The figure had time to leap down the stairs as the giant stepped back. But the giant grabbed him and threw him into the air. The giant leapt and gave him a gut punch. The figure made fissures around himself after colliding with the wall. The giant pushed his shoulder into his chest as he began to slide down. "Gah!" he exclaimed as a vicious elbow to the chest seized him and launched him into the air. Just as he got to a red-haired, smiling guard, the figure slid to a stop. The man said, "Need help?" But before the figure could respond, a sharp-ended bow staff materialized in its hands. After leaping to his feet and spinning the bow staff around his body, the figure charged at the giant. The giant simply grinned, not anticipating the figure's disappearance. Then he was struck hard on the back of his head and went down on his knees. After landing in front of him, the figure struck him in the face several more times before forcing the entire bow staff through the man's head and taking it out. The other guards threw kunai at the figure after watching in disbelief. Within a moment, the figure vanished as a cloak of red chakra materialized around it. Before they could stop him, he appeared in the center of 5 guards and cut each one's throat with the sharp end of the bow staff. The guard on the topmost box pile threw a kunai at him, but he dodged it and emerged ahead of 3 more guards. He struck the second guard with the pointy end of the bow staff and kicked one in the face. As the third guard kicked the figure in the back, it passed through his chest. But the man's foot was burned by the chakra cloak, which rendered the kick ineffective. The figure spun around and delivered a powerful blow to the final guard. The figure dragged the bow staff from the dead guard and hurled it at the final guard while avoiding another kunai. He fell after it passed through his neck. Dead. The red-haired guard said, "Look out behind you." The figure turned to see a woman approaching him. All of the guards and bandits, except for the giant man, were dressed in black pants and wore white shirts or no shirts at all, but the woman was running in his direction. This one was different, as the figure could see. She appeared to have more talent than the others. The woman turned her head to the side and kicked the figure's feet from under him after the figure punched her in the middle. While holding himself up with his arms, he rolled, leapt to his feet, and sent both of his legs in the direction of the woman. When she landed, the figure was already upright after the guard leapt over him. The guard questioned, "Who are you?" But the figure remained silent. Neko said, "My name is Neko." However, the figure once more refused to answer. Rather, the figure simply charged at her and delivered a second blow, but Neko easily sidestepped it and kicked him in the stomach, causing her to slide backward while her long blue hair ran freely behind her. The figure's eyes widened upon seeing her slit pupil as her gold eyes gazed into them. Neko gave him a cutesy smile as the figure halted and dropped into a fighting stance. Neko blinked when the figure abruptly said, "Kitsune." Neko grinned like a Cheshire cat when Kitsune said, "You can call me Kitsune." Although she was about his age, Kitsune saw that she was more mature than other girls her age. In order to prevent her from questioning the sudden pink tint in his cheeks or accusing him of being a pervert, he was glad he wore a mask that covered the lower half of his face. There was a black shirt underneath the dark blue jacket that covered the mature body. She wore a dark blue obi to keep her black pants, which appeared to be 2 sizes too big, in place. Her hands and feet had long, claw-like nails, and she was barefoot. However, Kitsune had to concede that the girl was rather adorable. After she attacked him, Kitsune had to growl, and the red-haired guard vanished. She smiled and said, "What's wrong, cutie? Looking for someone?" Naruto once more discovered that he liked wearing the mask over his face. He dropped to her hands, looking like an animal on all fours, and she said, "I'm your opponent now." What on earth is she? As his chakra moved through the warehouse, a silhouette thought, this is not part of the plan. As Neko watched Kitsune run at her at breakneck speed, she tensed her muscles. In a swift move, Kitsune punched Neko before turning and kicking her head with his outstretched leg. She ducked and jumped over a third kick to her legs after blocking the first one. With his back to her, Kitsune kicked his leg back, striking her in the stomach. With ease, she caught it and raised her leg in the hopes of throwing him off balance. He flipped to his feet and turned to punch her with ease, using only her hand as leverage. Neko was faster, though, and she backhanded Kitsune in the face, sending him crashing into a few boxes. Just as Neko appeared over him, ready to deliver a powerful foot to the chest, he looked up and rolled to the side. They grappled and fought for control after he leapt to his feet and ran at Neko. Neko was lifted off her feet by Kitsune, who was the stronger of the two. Knowing exactly what he was going to do, Neko swung around and slapped his arms away. After landing on her hands and feet, she glanced up just in time to avoid one of Kitsune's kicks. She stood up and quickly sidestepped one of Kitsune's blows. Neko managed to avoid Kitsune's subsequent blow to the face with a left fist. She flipped away from him after he kicked her in the body. A kick to the sternum stopped him as he ran toward her. He sent his own palm toward her face after she thrust a palm at him, which he deflected with his left forearm. She kicked him in the chin before ducking and backflipping away. As Kitsune struggled to recover from the vicious kick, he was launched into the air. He was able to turn over and get to his feet. His azure eyes followed Neko as she ran toward him, and he managed to jump just in time to avoid her leg sweep and land a foot on her chest. The kick sent her through 2 boxes and knocked all the oxygen out of her lungs. As though shouting, Kitsune put a hand on his hands to the side of his mouth and made quick hand gestures. Kitsune yelled, "Fire style," searing pain, as a ball of fire shot out of his mouth and made its way toward the downed Neko. The downed girl was suddenly shielded by a wall of earth. With the grace of a fox, Kitsune ran and leapt over the wall, sneering. He didn't anticipate another wall to appear in front of him when he landed behind the first one. He was boxed in by more that emerged from the side. He heard a cat meow and looked up to see Neko grinning at him. Suddenly she spit out a stream of fire and surrounded Kitsune completely. After landing on the earth wall, she gazed at the fire pit passively until her eyes brightened at the movement and she heard the fire growl loudly. As the fire abruptly rose from the pit and reached the sky, a smile appeared on her lips. Neko was launched through the warehouse with a second growl. As Neko struck the earth wall, Kitsune ascended it and gave her a scowl. She sat motionless after sliding down the wall. As his charred mask dropped from his face, he muttered a curse. He ripped out the remainder of his shirt and mask and screamed in rage. In any case, they were keeping him back. He approached her and grabbed her by the jacket collar. As she caught Kitsune by the arms and pushed both of her feet into his chest, causing him to fall onto his back, her golden eyes widened and she grinned. As Naruto rolled back and leapt to his feet, she landed on her feet and assumed a fighting stance. "You're a lot of fun," she said, grinning and glancing at him. Kitsune's eye narrowed as she said, "And well built. Now show me what the container of the Kyuubi can do." She scoffed when she saw the look in his eyes. With wide eyes, Naruto said, "Don't give me that bull. I know exactly who you are, Naruto." Neko laughed when Naruto asked, "Who are you?" Her features abruptly became more feral. As her canine teeth and nails grew, her animalistic eyes became more defined. "I told you, my name is Neko." Suddenly, a pair of blue cat ears emerged from the top of her head, and her ears vanished beneath her long blue hair. A tail materialized from behind Neko just as Naruto's eyes were about to pop out of his head. The girl was surrounded by blue chakra, which resembled Naruto's chakra cloak. Naruto felt a chill go down his spine, even though it was just as powerful as his. She purred as she abruptly found herself behind Naruto. "Show me." Naruto felt Neko's breath on his neck and blinked. As he turned on his fox eyes, Naruto thought, "I didn't even notice her move." He turned to elbow Neko in the face as everything became more apparent, but was taken aback to discover that he was moving too slowly to make contact. Naruto questioned his ability to touch her while in that form because she appeared to be in a different league. He crashed through the warehouse and into a tree after she punched him in the face. When he opened his eyes and saw Neko approaching him with her hips swaying sensuously, he moaned. She was grinning mischievously as Naruto used the tree to help him get to his feet. The night air brushed over his perspiration and felt cold. She ran and thrust a palm forward, saying, "Show me now." Neko's palm passed through the tree as Naruto ducked. Naruto leapt away from her. He was aware that she had allowed him to avoid that one. With a sly smile, she said, "You know I let you get away with that one." Naruto swore. "Show me what your beast can do." Naruto ran toward Neko, but she sent a smart knee to his stomach before he could strike her. He took a step back and doubled over. As Neko attempted to push her shoulder against his chest, he glanced up and leapt over her. But he wasn't prepared for Neko to leap as high and deliver an uppercut to his chin. With a hard thud, he hit the floor and rose slowly. He gestured with his hands. Fire style. Running fire, he exclaimed, encircling Neko with a stream of fire. He inhaled deeply and made more hand signals. Wind style. Divine wind. Naruto's mouth erupted into tiny tornadoes that were en route to Neko. As they engulfed Neko, the tornadoes absorbed the fire and turned into tornadoes of flames. Unharmed, she leapt from the flames and gave Naruto a knee to the face, shocking him. With his canine teeth growing and his whisker lines becoming more distinct, Naruto stood growling. His pupil stayed round, but his red irises darkened. He was surrounded by red chakra, which gave him a tail and ears on top of his head. Neko remarked, "That's better." When he was gone, she blinked, then felt a hard fist strike her left cheek. Then she felt a kick to her back, a knee to her stomach, and an elbow to the back of her head. She laughed as she skidded to a halt. It had been years since she had had such a good time. After vanishing, Naruto struck Neko's back with the bottom of his foot, causing her to fall to the ground. Naruto used his foot to push her down when she attempted to stand. She resisted going down even after he retreated a step. He brought it down and pushed her deeper into the earth while clasping his hands together. Unsurprised that she got up after the blow, he leapt back. She couldn't help but smile charmingly as his impassive gaze lingered on her. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth with her tongue and said slyly, "If you continue to stare at me like that, you're going to make me blush." As Neko approached him slowly, Naruto suppressed a flush as her more animalistic traits started to fade away like a mirage. The way Neko walked was so captivating. She gazed at him with intense intensity, her golden eyes gleaming. Her hair appeared to be ice that was gleaming brightly in the moonlight. Her black shorts were torn and had holes in them, and her jacket was long gone. Indeed, during the battle, the lower portion of her shirt was torn off and burned. Her pants were ruined, along with the shirt, and some blood trickled down his nose. He used his left arm to wipe it off. Her long, creamy legs appeared incredibly soft. Naruto snarled as she said, "Like the show?" with a perverted smile. Then she got serious. She said, "There are more like me. Others just like us." Naruto gave her a wary look as she came to a halt a foot from him. Naruto questioned, "What do you mean, us?" She smiled sweetly and lightly touched his left cheek, saying, "Don't trust the hunters. Any of them." Her final words before running into the forest were, "You're going to need my help in the future. Don't forget me." Before he heard applause, Naruto stood in the middle of the quiet night. A red-haired man said, "Good job, Naruto. 7 years of training and the results aren't disappointing." Naruto sighed as his cloak vanished. The red-haired man undoubtedly heard what. Sweat trickled down his brow, and he grinned. He laughed and ran his right hand through his silver hair. "Thanks, Roshi. Sensei." Roshi said, "Your taijutsu is at least mid-shunin." Naruto scowled. He complained, "Mid-shunin?" Roshi said, "You did get hit by a bunch of henchmen." Naruto sulked. Naruto grinned and Roshi approached him, putting a fatherly hand on his shoulder. "You have incredible stamina and chakra, and you managed to pull off that jutsu without a sweat." He said, "If it were up to me, I'd promote you to Chunin now." Naruto grinned broadly. "However, you know we can't do that." "Well, we shouldn't," he said, losing his smile. Roshi nodded as Naruto placed a hand on his stomach. Naruto nodded, and Roshi gave him a back pat. "Don't go overboard when you take the graduation test tomorrow. That way, no one will say anything. Make us proud, kid." Then Roshi blinked. "Whoa, wait." He began to move toward his house, but Naruto stopped him. Roshi gave a fleeting smile in response to Naruto's question, "What about the mission?" Naruto arched an eyebrow and said, "This was the mission. Take out the bandits and kill the big, bad boss. While you handled the small fries, I sneaked into the big man's room and finished the job." Naruto rasped. Roshi grinned and started to leave, saying, "Bastard." When Roshi's voice came from the forest, Naruto blinked and asked, "When was the last time you dyed your hair?" Naruto noticed a lake 20 feet away and said, "Your blonde hair is starting to show. You might want to take care of that, brat." Naruto noticed that he had blonde roots from the light from the moon above him as he ran over. Naruto always assumed he had silver hair, so he was perplexed as to why he had blonde roots. What the? He had no idea why he had blonde roots, but he stood and walked purposefully to the Tsuchikage's tower. He knew someone, though, who would. A shadow muttered a curse as he watched him go, sensing a presence behind him. "Well, I'm guessing that girl wasn't part of the genjutsu," Roshi speculated. As he entered the moonlight, Oonoki responded, "No, she wasn't." Roshi nodded when he added, still, he did pretty well. Oonoki sighed as he said, no doubt, still, what do you think she meant? In an attempt to punch Roshi's left arm, Oonoki accidentally popped his back. Let's worry about that later. For now, he said. He whimpered, ow, my back, and Roshi massaged his left arm. Old fool, what was that for? Oonoki glared at Roshi after gathering his thoughts. Roshi left without saying, he isn't supposed to know about his blonde hair, that's why, and made his way home. His body appeared to be made of dust that the wind was blowing away, and Oonoki vanished. Naruto proceeded down the corridor of the Tsuchikage's tower. He had a steely purpose and an unwavering mind. Entering through the double doors, he saw Oonoki leap from his desk and glance around, obviously bewildered. Seated on the chair in front of Onoki's chair, Naruto said gravely, old man, we need to talk. Ah, Naruto, you've returned. How did the training go? He inquired, not realizing that Naruto was acting unusually solemn. Oonoki grinned and said, great, took out about 60 men. Oonoki grinned and shook his head, saying, don't get too excited. Most of them probably dropped out when they were genin. He couldn't question him about it for fear of coming across as suspicious, but he wasn't sure why he hadn't brought up the Neko girl. Before his solemn manner returned, Naruto smirked and scoffed, saying, still, 60? That's quite the feat. Naruto stood and leaned forward, saying, old man, to begin. The hell's the deal with this? Oonoki asked, looking at his head. His eyes widened as they instantly moved to the blonde part of his hair. Before reclined in his chair, Oonoki said, interesting. Naruto raised an eyebrow and straightened his back before answering, Naruto, when was the last time you shampooed? What? Oonoki asked again, when was the last time you shampooed? And sighed when he saw Naruto open his mouth with the same bewildered look. Just answer the damn question, boy. Oonoki sighed and held his head, saying, a month, maybe 2. Naruto questioned, why should that matter though? Naruto's eyes narrowed as Oonoki stated, there is a reason why you have blonde roots, because your natural hair color is yellow. That shampoo I gave you was to help keep your hair silver. What? He questioned softly. You showed me a picture of my parents, none of them were blonde, he replied. With some truth to it, Oonoki stated, it's probably somewhere in your family tree. Naruto took a seat in the chair behind him as he stated, in any case, I chose to dye your hair silver. Why? Naruto shook his head and asked, have you seen anyone in Iwa with blonde hair? Oonoki allowed Naruto to process the information and attempt to respond to the question, do you know who does have blonde hair? When Naruto finally understood, he crossed his arms over his chest, muttered something under his breath, and turned away. Oonoki put his hands behind his ear and questioned, what? Speak up. The Yondaime. Naruto said nothing, but his irate expression vanished. Exactly, and I didn't think you'd want to look like him. Rather, his expression was one of hurt. Oonoki winced as Naruto turned his azure eyes on her and said, I don't like that I've been lied to for most of my life. Even if it's something small like this. Naruto stood up as Oonoki said, understandable. He was about to leave the room, but he paused before leaving the room. He said, is there anything else I should know? And Oonoki met his eyes directly. Naruto nodded and left the room after he replied, no. Naruto shut the door and stood there for a moment, his head hung low. Before leaving the tower, he said to himself, I guess I know who I can trust. With his hands in his pockets, Naruto strolled down the street. 2 days have gone by since Oonoki gave him and Roshi the mission, and on that same day, he met a girl who caught his attention. He now passed his graduation exam today. He believed that some of the teachers wanted him to fail. Following Roshi's advice, he did just enough to pass without appearing to be in danger. Naruto walked proudly down the street with his forehead protector tied to his forehead. But he didn't have a smile on his face or a spring in his step. His happiness was being weighed down by something. If the situation were different, Naruto would be bouncing around the village telling everyone that he had advanced to genin. In fact, he would most likely invite some friends to ramen. That's how happy he would be. Naruto, however, had no desire to rejoice. He was aware of the reason, but he had not yet accepted the notion. He couldn't believe it. The mere words would crush his soul. But he was aware. He knew the harsh reality somewhere in the back of his mind. The old man was untrustworthy. Because of her relationship with the elderly man, he was unable to trust Kurotsuchi. He was unable to trust Iwagakure, not entirely, anyway. He had faith in Han and Roshi. Roshi is less than Han. They were aware of his suffering and the inner loneliness that all Jinchuriki experience. They would never be able to relate to others the way that regular people do. Nevertheless, Naruto was happy to have Roshi and Han at least, regardless of how many others he managed to persuade to become his friends. He was more concerned with quality than quantity. As he watched, the sun started to set, revealing a sea of dark indigo on one side of the sky and reddish pink and orange on the other. The moon was visible, but the stars have not yet come out. Naruto halted and turned to see Kurotsuchi sprinting toward him, saying, "Hey, Naruto-kun." Her black hair didn't look bad on her, so she chose to keep it short. She was wearing what Naruto assumed was a long, red kimono with shorts over it, fishnet tights, and a sleeve missing from the bottom left side of the kimono and the right arm. Her eyes were nearly as pink as her cheeks. Her crush had been known to Naruto for some time. In retrospect, he had to assume that it began around the same time he started his rigorous training. Even though he hadn't seen her much since he began the training, he still considered her a friend and would go out with her whenever he had free time. Still, he hoped she would notice the quiet boy who would stare at her in class, or at the very least, stop running after him and take a moment to smell the roses. Naruto said, forcing a smile, "Hey Kurotsuchi." She continued to smile joyfully, regardless of whether she realized how fake it was. She said, "Aren't you happy? We're genin now." Naruto laughed and nodded. Kurotsuchi chuckled and said, "At least we won't have to listen to Sensei talk about boring stuff." She blushed, and Naruto grinned as he put his arm around her and began to walk. "True. So, she said. His abrupt action startled her, so she walked next to him. As Naruto put it, "Spit it out," she said, "Whose team do you think you'll be in?" And Naruto hummed, appearing to be genuinely considering it. At the moment, he considered that fact to be unimportant, but after giving it some thought, hell, he was still unconcerned. Naruto turned and looked at Kurotsuchi, saying, "Hopefully with someone I'm close with. What about you?" Naruto anticipated her saying, "With you." She blushed and said, "And not because I like you or anything, I just don't want to paired with some weaklings." Smooth, thought Naruto mockingly. Smooth, Kurotsuchi pondered. Her tact and skill made her smile. Kurotsuchi laughed, and Naruto couldn't help but laugh too. "I guess we'll see tomorrow. Though, knowing that old fool, he'll probably put us on the same team and then cry out from his back pain." Following a few blocks of silent walking and a few uncomfortable looks, Kurotsuchi bumped into Naruto's shoulder. She questioned, "What's wrong?" And Naruto forced another smile. When he realized he wasn't playing a trick on her, he put his smile away and asked, "What do you mean? What's the word?" Naruto shook his head in response to her joke, "Awesome? I think troublesome is better. You're troublesome. Hey, wonder if anyone else says that." In another village, a boy sneezed and used his shirt sleeve to wipe his nose. A woman exclaimed, "That's disgusting," and the young boy let out a sigh, "Shikamaru." The boy muttered, "Troublesome." A little hurt, Kurotsuchi gazed at Naruto. "Anyway," Naruto said, glancing at her, "it's nothing you should worry about." Then Naruto reassured her, "Honestly, I'm fine, I just got a lot of things going on in my head." She saw someone approaching them and opened her mouth, but nothing came out. To make it appear as though she had to go inside a random store, she said, "I guess I'll see you later then." She entered a lingerie store without realizing it at the time. When Naruto heard her yell, his laughter grew louder. A gruff voice said, "Naruto." Naruto grinned. Standing before the mountainous man, Naruto said, "Han.ni, what's up?" Han's paranoia was so intense that he made Naruto think of him as a footed tank. Wearing what he called steam armor, which had a furnace on the back that would release steam when he used it, he was heavily armored. His brown eyes were hidden by his armor, which reached the lower portion of his face. In addition to his red armor, he wore a red conical straw hat that appeared to be made of the same substance. Han wore black gloves and a black gi over his armor, the sleeves of which appeared to have been ripped off. He said, "I heard you graduated today. Congratulations." Naruto grinned and folded his arms across his chest. Han's brown eyes soften as he kneels in front of Naruto and puts a hand on Naruto's shoulder, saying, "I know you can do better than that, Han.ni." Naruto grinned and said, "I'm proud of you, Naruto." "Thanks." Naruto felt like a man after his training was over. This feeling intensified after he graduated and joined Iwa as an official shinobi. He had the impression that he was a man who could do no wrong and who always did things correctly the first time. He knew that he could live alone and succeed at it, so he didn't care if he had to. However, that feeling vanished whenever he was in Han's presence and was replaced by the sensation of a young child mindlessly following his older brother around. Although he didn't dislike it, he did question whether it made him somewhat reliant on Han. He shook his head, he already had a lot on his mind. He needed no more thoughts to occupy his thoughts. Naruto. Naruto blinked when he noticed Han standing above him, staring at him curiously. Dude, I fell asleep for a long time. Huh? Han reiterated, I asked if you'd like me to treat you to ramen? Naruto shook his head after giving it some thought. After saying goodbye to Han, Naruto continued to stroll around the village, saying, thanks but maybe later. I need to go to my thinking spot. At the boundary between the village and the mountains, he came to a halt. He started his ascent up the mountain after using his chakra to adhere to the wall. Upon arriving at the summit, he took a seat at the mountain's summit. He recalled the time he struggled to use his chakra to climb the damnable mountain, from the top to the bottom. Although he detested it, he was somewhat relieved that he had spent 6 months doing it because it turned out to be beneficial. Watching the sun cast its last rays before disappearing over the horizon and letting night fully settle into the village, he let out a satisfied sigh. Climbing the mountain and simply watching the sunset was something he always enjoyed. It was his favorite spot to sit and think or do nothing else. Naruto had a sudden flashback in which he saw the expression on Oonoki's face when he was asked if he needed to know anything else. Despite not being the most intelligent person in Iwa, Naruto was able to read body language and recognize deception. Everything was in the eyes. Naruto said to no one, "What aren't you telling me, old man?" The night air blew coolly over the whole village and the wind whistled. Unbeknownst to Naruto, a man with blonde hair was also perched atop a mountain, gazing down on his village while it slept. Minato turned his head slowly and said, Minato-kun. His wife was approaching him hesitantly. She took him in her arms and held him close. They're still impacted 13 years later. As he felt his wife tremble in his grasp, he said, I know, next month will be 14 years. Minato was unable to contain his smile as Kushina asked, what do you think he's doing? Kushina giggled as Minato remarked, probably eating ramen. He didn't think his son was dead because if he was, the Kyuubi would have escaped and his child would have died too. The Kyuubi would be running around, and he would have to worry. He would eventually locate and bring home his child, who was out there somewhere in the world. Minato and Kushina stood there for a while longer before leaving for their homes. Minato gazed at the papers he was holding. The task was straightforward. There has been some questionable activity close to the boundaries of the Land of Fire. Go there, see what's happening, and report back. It wasn't particularly noteworthy. Setting the mission scroll aside, he retrieved the file containing the teams that were available. He needed a team made especially for tracking, and there weren't many. 2 teams are ideal for that description. Minato made up his mind, rolled up the mission scroll, closed the file, put it in his pocket, and walked out of his office. His secretary turned back when she heard the Hokage's door open, and her tanned cheeks instantly flushed. Her brown eyes moved to the scroll in Minato's hand as she timidly brushed aside a stray lock of black hair. His secretary asked, why? Yandaime. Sama, are you going to assign someone that mission? Minato pretended to smile and nodded his head. Here, let me call someone to deliver it in. No, she said as she reached for her phone, but Minato's abrupt declaration interrupted her. He waved to her as he walked out, saying, it's fine. I need a break from the office. His back was to her, and he shook his head and sighed. Even after 14 years of marriage, fangirls continued to be present everywhere. Minato smiled as he stepped into the sunlight, taking in the tranquility of his village. He had somehow led his village into prosperity and peace within the 5 great nations despite the death of his son. Although they weren't at war, they weren't exactly allies of the other 4 countries either. He waved and grinned at the villagers he saw, occasionally striking up a conversation with the shinobi he encountered. The team he was searching for would always train at the same facility, so he knew where he was headed. He entered the boundaries of training ground 12 after a 10-minute or so walk. He saw the 3 genin cooperating in a fight against her just as he was ready to summon the team's sensei. Their sensei had wild black hair that reached his shoulders, and his eyes were a very unusual shade of red with a ring in them. She applied purple eyeshadow and red lipstick as makeup. Her usual attire was a red mesh armor blouse that showed only the right sleeve. On top of this was a very wide substance that looked like bandages and had a rose thorn-like pattern. She wore the Konoha forehead protector, standard shinobi sandals, and bandages on her hands and upper thighs. Kurenai Yuhi, their sensei, swerved quickly around a drill and escaped being caught by the Kakaichu bugs of the Aburame clan. Minato saw a boy snarling as the drill she had so effortlessly avoided came to a halt. He wore a gray fur-lined coat with a hood that was typically worn on his head, dark grayish pants that reached his calves, a fishnet undershirt with a blue forehead protector, and blue sandals. He also appeared to be wearing an armor plate. Out of a column of bugs came another boy. He was the taller of the 2 boys, with pale skin and bushy dark brown hair. He was wearing a sea green jacket with a high, upturned collar and dark sunglasses, just like the rest of his clan. When the taller boy made a simple gesture, a wave of insects materialized and rushed in Kurenai's direction. From his vantage point, Minato could see a young girl hiding behind a tree as the two boys led their sensei to the edge of the training grounds. The girl had lavender eyes, dark blue hair, and fair skin, qualities Minato knew she inherited from her mother. Her face was framed by chin-length strands of her cut hair. She was dressed in navy blue pants and a cream-colored hooded jacket with a fire symbol on the upper right and left sleeves and fur at the hem and cuffs. He gave Hinata a gentle smile upon seeing her again. When Heishi was born, he had been present. Minato had to chuckle at his normally stoic friend's expression as he freaked out. She was such a lovely baby, similar to a mental picture of a newborn Naruto in the arms of his lovely wife flashed into Minato's mind, and he turned his head away and stood up. When he looked back up after shaking his head, he saw Hinata leap out of her hiding place and attempt to strike her sensei with a chakra-powered palm. As Minato watched Kurenai backflip over Hinata, whose eyes widened at her sensei's agility and limberness, he couldn't help but laugh. Hinata fell to her left side as Kurenai landed with the elegance of a seasoned ballet dancer, knelt down, and spun in place, extending her left leg. When Hinata instantly rolled away from her sensei, Minato was astounded but not shocked. She used the momentum to lift herself up with her hands and flip away. Her breathing was a little labored as she landed next to her two teammates. Minato was taken aback when Hinata turned to face him, but his astonishment was quickly dispelled when he saw that Hinata was still using her Byakugan. Kiba took another sniff of the air and said, "Someone's here." His furry friend agreed with a bark. As Minato approached Team 8 and clapped his hands, Hinata bowed her head. Minato said, "That was a very inspiring display. You have an extraordinary team here, Kurenai." Kurenai grinned proudly at the compliment. Her team grinned as well, but Hinata blushed too, taking pleasure in Minato's flattering remarks. Team 8, Kurenai included, blinked in surprise and bewilderment. "It makes me more assured about Konoha's future and the continuation of the Will of Fire. It also makes me confident I won't have to worry about you four while you're out on your mission." Kiba said, "Mission?" And Minato gave a nod. He threw the mission scroll to Kurenai. Kurenai unrolled it after catching it. She read it, then turned her red, inquisitive eyes to her leader. "Question?" he said humorously, his eyes crinkling and his smile growing as he watched her response. Kurenai asked, "Are you sure you want us to do this mission, Hokage?" "Sama?" Minato's smile remained constant, but he raised an eyebrow in surprise. Kurenai shook her head in response to Minato's playful question, "Are you doubting your team's abilities, Kurenai?" She opened her mouth to speak, but Minato spoke first. "Very well then." Kurenai gave Kiba a mild glare in response to his question. "Not that I mind getting another mission, but what are you doing here?" Kiba's gaze shifted to the floor beneath him, and Minato chuckled while concentrating on the reprimanded boy. Minato looked back at Kurenai and said, "I came to personally deliver your mission to you because I needed to get out of that claustrophobic office. Unless, your sensei doesn't think you're capable enough to complete the mission." Kurenai's perspiration fell as Team 8 turned to face their sensei with curiosity. She replied, "It's not that I'm doubtful, just curious as to why us," and Minato gave him a casual shoulder shrug. He laughed and saw everyone smile as he said, "Your team has been completing D-rank missions without complaint for the past 2 months. Think of this as a reward for making my life as a Hokage that much less troublesome." He waved to Team 8 before leaving, saying, "Well, I should probably head back, I think I've procrastinated enough as it is." While Kiba spoke animatedly to Shino, who appeared to be as passive as ever, Kurenai and Hinata bowed. He muttered, "Ah, to be young," and went back to work. Kurenai turned to her team and grinned as he walked away. "All right team, this is a fairly simple mission. We're going to go to the Land of Fire's borders and investigate some suspicious activities. If we can handle the threat, we are allowed to confront the target and eliminate it. If it proves to be too much, we call for backup and run. No ifs, ands or buts. Is that understood?" Team 8 nodded their heads and sighed. "You're to go home and prepare for this mission. It will take at least a day to go there, 2 days to search the area and then another day to return. Pack accordingly." Dismissed. Team 8 yelled, "Hi," before turning and making their way home. Kurenai saw Kiba smiling like a kid at a toy store, waving his arms around, and chatting animatedly with both of his teammates. Hinata laughed, and Kurenai could tell he was having fun with his teammates despite Shino's lack of expression. Kurenai watched them slip out of her view and made her way home. He leapt back, and Naruto ducked, looking at his sparring partner passively. He let out a sigh as his thoughts turned to the past 2 months. He was paired with Kurotsuchi, Daichi, and his sensei after being assigned to his team. Although he should have known better, he was a little taken aback to find Kurotsuchi on his team. That old man, damn him. Sitting on the edge of the training field, Kurotsuchi observed him and Daichi engage in a fierce sparring match. Naruto was a little nervous because she appeared to be so preoccupied with him. She was staring at him as if he were freaking Kami, but why? Girls were strange. The voice of Naruto's sparring partner said, "Pay attention." Not expecting Daichi to spin and then kick him in the chest, Naruto narrowly avoided a kick aimed at his head. Just as Daichi was about to approach him, Naruto rolled and leapt to his feet using the momentum from the kick. After drawing a kunai from his pouch, Naruto confronted Daichi in the center and deflected the weapon that Daichi had previously drawn. Naruto grinned as he slammed his knee into Daichi's chin and effortlessly pushed him back, gazing into his gray eyes. While Daichi attempted to catch his breath, Naruto waited idly. He was easily a foot shorter than the boy Naruto was standing over. He wore dark red pants, black shinobi shoes, and a long, sleeved shirt that covered his hands. He had short brown hair. Daichi shifted his right arm and hurled a kunai at Naruto, who leapt sharply to the left. Naruto pulled out more kunai and threw them at his fallen sparring partner, comrade, after avoiding Daichi's kunai with ease. Leaping to his feet, Daichi leapt back, out of the way of the kunai's destination. When he saw Naruto emerge behind him with a kunai at the small of his back, he suppressed a gasp. Daichi smirked as he looked back at Naruto and remarked, "Nice move." Naruto grinned back and shoved Daichi in front of him. Naruto turned to his sensei and said, "Not bad, Naruto." He had been trained by Oonoki, Han, and Roshi over the past 6 years, but he had also been guided by his sensei. Being a Jonin sensei at such a young age made him an inspiration to him. He was just 16. "Your head still seems to be in the clouds, but as long as you avoid getting distracted, you'll define in future missions." Deidara grinned at his charges and said, "Thanks, Deidara. Sensei." He was dressed in the typical Iwagakure shinobi uniform. Naruto was taken aback by Deidara's blonde hair when he first met him. After touching his own hair, Naruto made the decision to let it grow out and turn back into its original blonde hue. Naruto had to adjust to the strange appearance. It was his method of defying the elderly man. In any case, it wasn't too bad. It gave him a somewhat related appearance to his sensei. Deidara gave a single clap of his hands, and his smile grew as his eye wrinkled. His team moaned, "I got a sort of surprise for all of you." Kurotsuchi raised her arms in rejection and said, "If it's another clay sculpture of us, no thanks, I have enough at home." Deidara laughed. Deidara joked, "No, it's nothing like that, but you could at least pretend you like my art." Kurotsuchi smiled softly and shook her head. Naruto grinned and said, "The mission is almost over, we'll be heading home soon." His enthusiastic cheer made Kurotsuchi and Daichi laugh. "Yes, this boring mission is almost over," he exclaimed with delight. Deidara went on, "We just need to wait for the Hoshikage to respond, and then we're done." Deidara made a couple of clones and had them stand on either side of him. "While we wait, practice on your evasion skills." Naruto nodded as the 2 Deidara clones sprinted past him and toward the other 2 charges. "Naruto, come with me. I need to speak with you." Deidara led Naruto to the far side of the training area, and Naruto followed. With a smile on his lips, Deidara turned to face Naruto, who said, "What is it, Deidara, sensei?" He gave a direct response, "There's a jutsu I want to teach you." Naruto grinned at the idea of picking up a new jutsu to expand his skill set. Nevertheless, his curiosity overcame his happiness. As they fled from his clones, Deidara turned back to his team and asked, "What about Kurotsuchi and Daichi?" His light blue eyes returned to Naruto, who never took his eyes off his sensei, and he said, "They can't handle this kind of jutsu just yet. Their chakra reserves aren't at the level this jutsu requires. You, however, because of your tenant, can probably perform this jutsu without breaking a sweat." Naruto's eyes widened once more. Naruto's cerulean eyes gleamed as he asked, "Okay, so what is it?" His eagerness to learn jutsu was evident. Naruto was signaled by Deidara to turn and concentrate on his 2 teammates. As Daichi gazed at his clone, waiting for its next move, Naruto turned to see Kurotsuchi barely avoiding the clone's kunai. Deidara yelled, "Very good," loud enough for his team to hear. All 4 of them turned to stare at the blonde sensei as the 2 clones froze in place. As the Deidaras charged at them, each holding a kunai, Daichi and Kurotsuchi leapt back, saying, "I want you 2 to spar with the clones. No ninjutsu, strictly taijutsu." Begin. So, Deidara asked, turning to face Naruto, who was staring at him with anticipation. What's the jutsu? Naruto was startled by the question. What kind of clones do you think I made? And turned his attention back to the clones. He gave a shoulder shrug. Rock clone? Deidara asked, his eyes never leaving his charges as his smile grew. Before turning to the clones, Naruto maintained his gaze on Deidara and said, just watch, Their features and movements were identical to those of the rock clone, and his eyes narrowed. Until Daichi was able to deliver a forceful blow to the clone's chin. When the clone simply exploded and left a cloud of smoke in its wake, Naruto's eyes widened. Expecting the clone to shatter into bits of rock, Daichi blinked in surprise. Naruto was unable to look away from his sensei, who chuckled at his expression, as his eyes threatened to burst from his head. Deidara responded to Naruto's unasked question by saying, that is called the Shadow Clone Jutsu. As he tapped his temple, Deidara remarked, a useful jutsu, better than the Rock Clone Jutsu. When the clone expires, its memories and any remaining chakra is sent back to the original. Deidara arched an eyebrow in response to Naruto's question, so why teach it to me? Naruto shook his head frantically, asking, do you not want to learn it, Then let's get started, As Deidara observed Naruto grinning confidently, he saw that his clones were effectively testing the limits of his teammates. With ease, the boy learned the jutsu in less than 2 hours, and on his first successful attempt, he was able to summon roughly 20. Deidara yelled, all right, stop. The Narutos froze in their tracks. There was a silent sigh of relief from both Daichi and Kurotsuchi, and Daichi immediately collapsed onto his back. Oh Kami, thank you for showing mercy. Naruto laughed as he spread out his clones and experienced the memories of the clones instantly coming back to him. He recoiled, but not enough to worry him. He returned his focus to Deidara. Deidara remarked, team training is over, good job, you can do what you like, so long as whatever it is you do doesn't give you a bad name. His team said, hi, sensei. As Deidara vanished and Naruto turned to face his teammates, he said, now if you'll excuse me, I'll go catch up on some sleep and you all should too. We're heading out first thing in the morning. Naruto exclaimed, I'm hungry, let's get some ramen, Datbeo. Daichi rolled his eyes and Kurotsuchi moaned. What? In response, Kurotsuchi said, somewhat agitated, you're always eating ramen, ramen boy. Daichi gave a nod of agreement. He asked sincerely, don't you ever get tired of that stuff? And Naruto appeared shocked. With genuine confusion, Naruto questioned, how could anyone ever get tired of ramen? It's only the best food on the planet. Kurotsuchi let out a moan. She had grown accustomed to hearing her blonde teammates say things like that. All three of them were grinning, but Daichi simply rolled his eyes once more. All three would claim the other two as friends if questioned, and despite their teasing and needling, they thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. The girl glared at Naruto and said, oh, all right, let's get something to eat, but she added, but no ramen. Naruto rolled his eyes and moaned. Daichi gave him a back pat while laughing. Hey, Naruto, don't forget, you've got your private stash with you. I saw you pack it, he replied. When Naruto realized Daichi was correct and that he did have roughly 24 tiny cups of instant ramen with him, his eyes glowed. Every time he went somewhere, he packed that. All right, I guess I can go a meal without ramen, for you guys sake, he said, grinning at them in his usual way. Kurotsuchi grinned at Naruto, flattered by his remarks despite knowing what he was up to. Her words were, come on, you two, let's see what we can find to eat around here. At the moment, Naruto and his group were sipping tea at a tiny eatery they had discovered on the outskirts of the village. Naruto was happy because he hadn't seen a place to get ramen anyhow and this one looked good enough. It seemed to have candles burning on every table and very little light otherwise, which is why Kurotsuchi liked it. It created a very intimate and, in her opinion, romantic ambiance. The thought made her blush a little. Kurotsuchi blushed, and Naruto wondered why, but he dismissed it. Kurotsuchi was seated on one side of the table, while he and Daichi occupied the other. Once more, Naruto felt a little uneasy when he saw her staring at him. Why on earth was she looking at him that way? With his usual lack of tact, Naruto said, Kurotsuchi, why are you staring at me? She tried to claim she wasn't, but all she could manage was a string of incomprehensible noises as she blushed at being discovered. Naruto's confusion increased even further. When Daichi realized what was happening, he started laughing. Naruto was completely lost now. Earlier, when he was sparring with Daichi, Kurotsuchi was staring at him. Later, she was staring at him at their table, and now Daichi was laughing wildly without any apparent reason. Exasperated by his perplexity, Naruto turned to scowl at Daichi. Angrily, He questioned, "What is so funny?" Daichi was so giddy with laughter at this that he nearly fell out of his chair. Naruto humped in annoyance and folded his arms. Still stuttering, Kurotsuchi eventually stopped and burst out laughing at Naruto's, to her, adorable pout, which he had put on out of frustration. She couldn't help but laugh, even though she knew she was mostly to blame. The laughter between Kurotsuchi and Daichi quickly spread like wildfire. At last, Naruto stopped pouting and started laughing too, though he wasn't really sure why. When their food finally arrived, the three of them were grinning and chatting casually about their mission and their plans to return home the following day. As her team came to a halt behind her, Kurenai remarked, "This is far enough." Team 8 nodded as they put their packs down and started to set up camp, saying, "We'll set up camp and continue in the morning." Before Hinata could begin erecting her tent, she felt Kiba's hands brush against her own. He grinned and Hinata blinked, saying, "Don't worry about setting up the tent. I'll do it for you." Amused, she let go of the tent and shook her head. As Kiba was exposed to Hinata's endearing smile, his cheeks turned pink. "Thank you, Kiba-kun." Hinata blinked once more as he turned away. Kiba gave her a smile and nodded his head in response to her question, "Are you okay?" Hinata was content just to see him smile, so she focused on her sensei, who was absorbed in her thoughts and leaning against a tree. "Kurenai." "Sensei?" Kurenai asked, his eyes searching Hinata. As the tents were being set up, Hinata turned to Kiba and then Shino and asked, "Yes, what is it?" She smiled and said, "Is there something I can do?" Kurenai smiled back at Hinata after humming to herself. With a nod, Hinata said, "How about you go find some firewood?" and proceeded to venture further into the forest. She hummed a gentle tune as she gathered the firewood, taking in the splendor of the natural world. She looked up at a clear blue sky that was just beginning to turn pink with the evening and a sun that shone brightly, both of them enjoying the luxury of not having any flaws. But Hinata was aware that it would likely be an hour or so before the sunset and night would take over as the dominant force in the sky. When a breeze blew past Hinata, she stopped to simply stand and breathe in the aroma of the natural world. She exhaled deeply and smiled even more broadly as she carried on gathering firewood. In the distance, a figure grinned cynically as he watched Hinata closely. Hinata abruptly turned around and landed a solid palm on the man's stomach as he slowly approached from behind and was ready to cover her mouth with a cloth in his hand. The man's eyes grew wide, and then he was swallowed up by smoke and a log took his place. With her senses sharp and her Byakugan in action, Hinata dropped the firewood she was holding and dropped into her battle stance. She removed her own kunai after deftly dodging one that was headed for her stomach. As he ran toward her, she dodged another kunai, then another, before turning to face her assailant. Hinata swung around just in time to get him close enough to drive the tips of her fingers into his left arm as he thrust his kunai forward. The man winced as he felt some sensation leave his arm as she sent chakra through her tips. Leaping back, he used his right arm to hold his left arm. After giving Hinata a fierce look, he raised his left arm and began to make hand signals. After taking a deep breath, he let out a massive tidal wave. When Hinata saw the enormous wave head for herself, her eyes widened. The man grinned beneath his mask as it struck her. Hopefully, the jutsu would knock her unconscious, but it wouldn't kill her. When the water over her started to swell until only a whirling dome of water and chakra remained, his right eyebrow lifted a few inches. With icy lavender eyes, Hinata turned away from her technique and faced her assailant. She was encircled by water droplets before she vanished in an instant. When Hinata spun on her heels and attempted to strike him with a double palm to the chest, the man ducked under her roundhouse kick and leapt back. Then all of a sudden Hinata was surrounded by 5 black-clad men. 3 of the men turned to water and fell to the ground as a result of her successful defense. However, because they appeared to be faster than the others, the other 2 made things more difficult for her. One of the clones managed to grab her right arm and slam her into a nearby tree, but she was able to kick it in the chest after parrying its punch. She let out an agonized cry, but she swiftly pushed her elbow back and forced it to land on the clone's chest in retaliation. She was able to disturb the clone and send it crumbling into the ground before it returned to its natural element by using the chakra that was coursing through her elbow. She saw the final clone coming toward her and leapt into the air with her Byakugan. But she spun before it could get to her. "Kaden!" she yelled, and the clone smashed into the rotating chakra dome, scattering it. Still covered in the water from the clone's death, she came to a stop. The man yelled, "Water style! Water prison jutsu!" Hinata's eyes widened as she found herself imprisoned in a water dome. Glancing over her shoulder, she noticed the haughty smile beneath his mask. The man said, "I finally have you, Hyuga." As she started to panic and feel confined in the water prison, Hinata glared at him. She would soon lose consciousness because she was running out of oxygen. But before she did, she watched the man take off his mask, and his menacing smile made her shudder. Following their meal, the three of them headed back to camp. Kurotsuchi quickly fell asleep after crawling into her tent. Daichi and Naruto also went into their tent. After a brief period of sitting and talking, Daichi lay down and dozed off as well. Around that time, Naruto experienced an unexpected spike in claustrophobia. He knew he couldn't remain in the tent any longer, but he didn't know what it meant. He quietly crawled out of the tent and headed to a nearby clearing to finish his training. He created a few clones and used them for training. He did feel somewhat better as he went along, but he was still bothered by something. He sensed something wasn't quite right. He simply didn't know what it was. Naruto pushed this ominous feeling aside and focused again on his training. Sometimes he would be discovered among his clones while training with his team, and either Daichi or Kurotsuchi would attempt to attack him. He grinned as he recalled how he had automatically replaced himself with a clone. He recalled Kurotsuchi confessing that she believed she had the original and cursing her luck. Naruto chuckled at the moment and advised her to practice her detection abilities. But if he were being honest with himself, he would acknowledge that if he hadn't substituted a clone for himself, she would have achieved a hit. Or at least a near hit. He is currently practicing replacing himself with one of his clones. He wanted it to come naturally to him, even though it wasn't that difficult. He separated his clones into two groups after ensuring he understood, one to attack him and one to replace him in order to mimic a real battle. After a while, he let his eyes rest for a minute while the sounds of the night filled his ears, and he laughed wearily as he collapsed onto his back. Every living thing was awake here, in contrast to Iwa's nightlife. Naruto sat up, wiped perspiration from his brow, and gazed up at the sky. The stars were shining brightly over the dark sky, and the moon was as lovely as ever. He had no idea that someone else was looking at the moon. Hinata's lavender eyes blinked the tears away as they trickled down her cheeks. As she closed them and whimpered under her gag, more tears escaped their captivity as she recalled how her kidnapper had thrown away her former life. She hoped Kami would send someone, anyone, to save her. Before her eyes turned cold, she blinked. She became angry with herself, detesting the fact that she was merely crying, pitying herself, and hoping someone would come to her rescue. She was the heiress of the Hyuga clan, and not just any Hyuga. She would seize the chance when it came up because she was skilled enough to get herself out of this mess. Hinata had to wait for the time being. Even after taking his 1000th sniff of the air, Kiba failed to detect any scent. Frustrated that Hinata's scent had abruptly disappeared, he growled. It shouldn't have happened now. That doesn't happen. What caused it to occur, then? Kiba turned to face his sensei, who walked with poise and a passive expression on her face, but Kiba knew better. Kiba. The only kunoichi with whom Hinata truly bonded was Kurenai, and vice versa. Kurenai was hurting more than she admitted because she didn't know where her surrogate daughter was. We need to head back. Kiba was caught off guard by this. He yelled, "What?" as Shino materialized next to Kurenai. Kurenai explained, but she noticed that she wasn't reaching Kiba. We have no leads. We can't find her no matter how hard we try. With all this water, any scent left behind is erased now. We need to return to Konoha and report this in. If you really want to help her, you need to believe me and come back to Konoha with us. In an attempt to convince his friend to think rationally, Shino continued, Kurenai. Sensei's logic is sound, Kiba. Kiba turned his head away from his teammates, unwilling to acknowledge their correctness. Kiba bowed his head and muttered solemnly, it feels like we're abandoning her. Shino and Kurenai shared the same sentiments, but they both understood that they could no longer assist Hinata. In order to send skilled tracking nin, they had to return home. Kurenai stated, we feel that, too, but this is the best course of action. Shino nodded that they agreed. Kiba gave them another glance, then nodded his head and closed his eyes. Kurenai sighed and turned away from them, saying, fine. Kurenai turned and ran off after saying, let's go. Shino paused to look at his comrade before following immediately. He was scanning his surroundings, making last-minute observations and sniffs before he had to go. Akamaru tried to persuade his owner to pursue his sensei by rubbing his head against him. Kiba sighed in defeat, then turned to Shino and nodded his head. They wanted to reach Konoha as soon as possible, so they followed Kurenai after he nodded back. A worried expression came to Akamaru's face as he muttered under his breath, we'll find you, Hinata-chan, I promise. A gruff voice said, wake up. Hinata's eyes snapped open. She was shocked that she had fallen asleep. This is not good. As she sat up, her arms and legs still bound, she thought, now I don't know where we are or in which direction we've headed. She saw that the gag had been taken off her mouth, but her arms and legs were still bound. As her kidnapper rummaged through his pack, she gave him a fierce look. At last, He removed a ration bar, hurriedly removed the wrapper, and placed the bar in front of her mouth. Hinata looked bewildered at the bar and blinked. Hinata turned back to face the man as he demanded, "Eat." She scuffed and turned her head away. The man snarled. Hinata turned her icy gaze to the man and said, "You're not eating anything else." "I don't like to be fed, I can do it myself." Hinata gave the man a proud hiss. The man patiently shook his head when she added, "I'm not a child." Throwing the ration bar at her lap, the man said, "Fine," and stood up. Taking another length of rope from his pack, he wrapped it around her waist and fastened the other end to a tree just 2 feet away. The man said, "I'm going to give you only one warning tonight. Try anything funny and I'll slice your throat open with the nails on my fingers." His eyes had a devilish gleam, and Hinata could tell by looking into them that he would follow through on his threat. "My clients would prefer a whole hyuga, but they'd accept it if I only bring your eyes, if you catch my drift." She gave a slow nod, but her face remained severe. She didn't want him to understand how terrified she was by his threat. Watching her grab the ration bar and look at it calculatingly, he untied her arms and stepped back. When she briefly closed her eyes and then opened them again, he understood why her brow furrowed and she muttered something under her breath. The man pulled out another ration bar and explained, "Forget it, those are chakra. Absorbing ropes tying you down." After glaring at the man, Hinata took a bite out of the bar and said, "I'll let that one slide, but the next one will be your last mistake." She was too hungry to notice that it wasn't exactly a cinnamon roll. As they ate in silence, Hinata kept glaring at her kidnapper after she was done. "What?" he inquired irritably. The man sneered when Hinata asked, "Why are you kidnapping me?" "Don't worry about it now," was his casual response. Hinata simply gave a defiant shake of her head. With conviction, she said, "Tell me." The man closed his eyes. "It's my mission to kidnap a hyuga. It's just your luck that I ran into you and your team." He answered casually, as though he were discussing going to the grocery store to buy groceries. Humming to herself, Hinata asked, "Any other questions?" "Well." The man got up, firmly grasped Hinata's hands, and tied the rope around her wrists, saying, "Too bad, we need to keep moving." He was tying the rope so tightly that she moaned, but before she could express how hurt she was, the man covered her mouth with the gag once more. After that, he rolled up the rope, untied it around the tree and her waist, and placed it in his pack. She was glaring at him once more when he turned to face her. With a menacing smirk, he kicked her hard in the middle. She groaned in pain and gasped beneath her gag. Her pained expression made the man laugh. He took Hinata by the short raven hair and gave her a hard yank to get her to stand up, saying, "That was to show you that I will carry out my threat." He picked her up and tossed her carelessly to his shoulder, saying, "This is just for fun." With a grunt, he regained his balance and moved forward. The man merely laughed when Hinata screamed angrily and unintelligibly. Hinata glared at the back of his head and then sighed, causing her body to relax, saying, "Shut up." She found patience more difficult than she had anticipated. Naruto's face and hands felt cool and fresh from the water. With a joyful sigh, he drank some of the water from the reflecting pool. Nothing was better than sipping on pure, natural water while the moon was full. Apart from ramen, of course, but that was unnecessary. He deadpanned while clutching his stomach with his right hand as it growled. He had a bright smile on his face as he ran to the fallen tree and picked up his pack after a thought suddenly occurred to him. He carried it to the river and dipped his hand in it, searching for something, then yanked his arm out and removed a pot and 3 cups of instant ramen. He started pouring water from the reflecting pool into the pot. After setting it down by the pool, he collected branches from a variety of trees and stacked them close to the pool. He quickly made hand gestures to bring his chakra to his mouth, then spat a tiny flame onto the branches. He pulled out a camp grill and set it over the fire as it started to grow. He set the pot on the grill and waited impatiently for the water to boil, his body trembling with anticipation. He started thinking about the old man once more while he waited. He wondered what secrets he was hiding from him, and his smile wavered. The fire crackled, adding more light to the room, and he gazed into it absently. When he jolted out of his reverie and noticed the boiling water in the pot, his smile reappeared. After filling 1 instant ramen cup with hot water, he put it down to fill the other cup. He filled the second and third cups, then sighed as he waited for the ramen to cook in the water. As though gazing at the cups would speed up their cooking, he complained, "This is taking too long." He had to start eating the ramen because he could not stand it any longer. He stopped inches away and his ears perked up as he reached down to pick up his first cup of ramen. He heard what sounded to him like hushed groans and cries. His fox eyes scanned the surroundings as he closed and then opened his eyes again. Naruto could see movement to his left after he had adjusted to the darkness. Squinting his eyes, he saw 2 figures, one slung over the shoulders of the other standing upright. One of the two, probably the one being carried, let out muffled cries that he heard. Naruto, too intrigued for his own good, rose, scaled a tree, and slowly followed the two enigmatic figures. He took in more detail the closer he came. He noticed that the person on his shoulders was a jonin at most and a man at least twice his age. He was dressed in a black jumpsuit and a black mask. A girl of his age sat on his shoulders. She wore a cream-colored hooded jacket with a fire symbol on the upper right and left sleeves, navy blue pants, and lavender eyes. Her hair was raven. What Naruto thought was chakra. Absorbing rope was used to tie her wrists and ankles. She had a trail of dry tears on her pale cheeks and her mouth was gagged. It was his thing, his weakness, and he detested seeing any woman in distress. He would do anything in his power to assist a woman. He obviously made an exception for women who were obviously his enemies or who obstinately refused his assistance. Even so, he was aware that this might soon result in his death, but old habits do not go away. The girl's eyes widened as she saw him when she looked up. Naruto's fist clenched as she groaned beneath her gag. Then, as the man came to a halt, Naruto stopped on his branch. His eyes narrowed as he considered the man's intentions. He heard something approaching from behind. He moved just in time to avoid being stabbed in the back by a kunai. As he leapt from the branch and landed between his latest assailant and the man clutching the girl, the kunai scratched his left flank. He shifted from side to side, glancing quickly between the man holding the girl and his assailant. The man said, "Who the hell are you?" And Naruto's gaze fell on his assailant, who lunged forward. Naruto kicked his attacker's feet from under him and ducked under his kunai with the speed that training had given him. Naruto saw that the assailant resembled the other man exactly when he fell. Most likely, it's a clone. What sort of clone, though? Without missing a beat, Naruto climbed on top of the clone and delivered a forceful blow to the clone's face. When Naruto saw the clone explode into water and attempt to swallow him, he immediately dismounted. He faced the man with his back to the puddle. With his free mask, he lowered his mask and grinned menacingly. He remarked, "You're quicker than this girl was." Hinata let out a loud moan, obviously offended. Naruto simply gave a shrug. Naruto's chivalrous demeanor overcame him as he asked, "So, what are you doing with this girl?" The man grinned smugly and said, "Certainly doesn't look like you're escorting her home." He questioned, "What makes you say that?" And Naruto couldn't help but smile in response. With his right hand stroking his chin, Naruto pondered, "It might have been the fact that she's tied up and being carried by you at night. But mostly, it's because you don't look like the escorting type." With a phony look of hurt, the man sneered, "Not true, I'm escorting this girl somewhere right now." Naruto raised an eyebrow but kept his smile, obviously amused, and said, "You don't even know me." The man turned and left after saying, "Now why don't you beat it, brat? I'm busy at the moment." After a single glance at Hinata, Naruto's eyes met hers. He saw the disappointment and wonder in her eyes, as well as the anger. Naruto stepped forward and said, "Sorry." The man turned to face him as he heard his voice. Naruto said, "But I can't let you go without a fight. This seems too suspicious." The man grinned back at him. "You're willing to die for someone you've never met before?" asked the man. Naruto inhaled deeply and let out a sigh. "This is something I just can't walk away from. Not if I want to live with myself afterward." Naruto responded, and the man gradually pushed Hinata aside. The man with the kunai said, "If that's how it's going to be." Hinata's eyes were wide as she stared at Naruto, unable to believe who she was seeing. It wasn't logical, so it couldn't be. Was it true what the Yondaime Hokage had said about his son's survival? Although he hadn't told everyone, he was informed of nearly everything because Minato and her father were close friends. The boy looked exactly like the Hokage, despite the fact that he had shorter hair and facial whiskers. However, his name. Hinata was currently unable to recall the name of Minato's son. She had it on the back of her mind. As she watched the man make hand signals while building up a tremendous amount of chakra, her focus was diverted from her thoughts before she could think of his name. As he observed the man surrounded by chakra, Naruto uttered the words, "Round 1." The man yelled, "Water style. Storm upheaval," as water started to pour down from the sky and approach Naruto. Naruto let the wind out of his lungs with a quick hand gesture and a deep breath, and he was launched backwards, away from the falling water. The water soaked the ground beneath them as he skidded to a halt. Running, the two adversaries engaged in a kunai battle in the center before the elder could push the younger away. As the man pursued him, Naruto repeatedly flipped back. Short of a flip, Naruto halted and charged forward, surprising the man. The man was sent rolling back after Naruto delivered a powerful punch to his stomach. After making another hand signal, The man was already standing and Naruto was encircled by smoke. 7 Narutos suddenly emerged from the smoke and rushed in the man's direction. The man's eyes grew wide, but he steadied himself and managed to repel the clones with some difficulty. Before leaping away and making the tiger hand sign, he kicked one clone in the stomach, causing it to scatter. A 7th water clone went toward the original Naruto, who remained behind, while the other 6 water clones ran at the remaining 6 shadow clones. Narrowing his eyes, the Naruto in the back materialized in front of the clone and kicked its head. The water clone jabbed straight at Naruto's chest after blocking it with his left arm. Before it burst into a puff of smoke, Naruto let out a moan. The eyes of the clone grew wide. Shadow Clone Jutsu. The lone water clone was ambushed by more clones that emerged from the trees. The clone was outnumbered 10 to 1 and had no chance. While others went to deal with the original, the clones quickly disrupted the one water clone and went to join their brethren in defeating the other water clones. The original Naruto descended a tree and approached Hinata covertly while they were doing so. He was staring at her when she saw him draw a kunai. Thinking he was looking at her body like a pervert, she flushed. When he released her arms and legs by running the kunai through the rope, she was taken aback. Her blush intensified as he gazed into her eyes, which were only a few inches away. Before Hinata could question Naruto, he got up and pursued the kidnapper who had scattered the final clone. Get out of here! Naruto inhaled deeply and expelled a massive ball of fire while making hand signals. It came toward the man, but he stopped it with a wall of water that he had previously called forth. Even though the battle was surrounded by steam, Naruto still charged through it and used his fox eyes to find the man who was attempting to create water clones to surprise Naruto. Wind style. Divine Wind. A blast of wind blew away the steam from Naruto's mouth before forming into tornadoes that ripped up the ground as they approached Naruto's assailant. As the tornadoes tore at his sides, the man's eyes widened and he started to yell. When the man transformed into water, Naruto wasn't shocked, but he wasn't prepared for him to come up behind him and kick him behind his back. It launched Naruto into the reflecting pool. After removing his head from the water, Naruto inhaled deeply and shook his hair to remove any remaining water. Trapped in a dome of compressed water, Naruto swore, water style, water prison jutsu. Using his left hand to hold the water prison, the man laughed. With a cunning grin, he remarked, how ironic. This is how I captured the girl you were trying to save. Now you're going to die and she's still coming with me. A female voice yelled, 8 trigrams 60. 4 palms. Behind the man. He snarled as he let Naruto out of the prison so Hinata wouldn't hit him. Standing next to Naruto, Hinata gave the man a scowl. After giving her a curious glance, Naruto noticed something reflected from her neck. Is that a protector for the forehead? As Hinata approached the man standing atop the reflecting pool and started attacking him with chakra, powered palms and fingertips, he thought. The man had some water jutsu and was quick. He was a Jonin, Hinata surmised. Even though he was from Iwa, she didn't have a chance against the man, but perhaps they could defeat him together with the boy who saved her. Reaching the man on all fours, Naruto swung his claws at him. The man saw it coming and jumped to the left to avoid it. He grinned at Naruto's unsuccessful attempt until he felt 3 long cuts go from his chest to his waist on his left side. He jumped away from the 2 genin, growling. He growled at Naruto, who gave him an animalistic grin, you brat. He growled, how did you do that? Before he charged again, Naruto replied, wind chakra. Hinata was standing directly behind him, supporting him. The man leapt and slammed his hands on the water's surface, saying, don't get cocky. Water style. Mouth of a serpent. A massive column of water materialized behind the man as he uttered the name of the jutsu. It transformed into a huge water snake and swallowed Naruto whole. Astonished, Hinata watched as the serpent transformed into a river, carrying Naruto into the forest. Pay attention. Hinata blinked as she was pushed into a tree and engulfed by a tidal wave. She was on her hands and knees, struggling to catch her breath due to the force of the blow. Her brain was hammering against her skull, and her vision briefly became blurry. A hand sprang out, caught Hinata by the neck, and lifted her to his eye level as she groaned in agony. Hinata's forehead protector was torn from her neck by the man, who then threw it away. The man tightened his grip and hissed, you bitch. Hinata gripped the man's wrist and squinted her eyes in agony. The man laughed hysterically and placed the index and middle fingers of his free hand over Hinata's eyes, saying, I told you I'd kill you and take your eyes. She struggled to get out of his grasp as she writhed. This cannot be the end. I still don't have time. Hinata's mind yelled in defiance. She refused to mindlessly obey the dictates of fate and destiny. She was going to fight to the end. The man's back slammed into the pool's bottom as a red chakra made hands suddenly grabbed him by the waist and shot forward into the water. Naruto gasped as the hand withdrew back. He returned to Hinata's side, where she was kneeling and massaging her neck, grinning. He asked, keeping his gaze fixed on the reflecting pool, "You all right?" With a nod, Hinata got up. Just as Naruto opened his mouth to speak, his gaze fell upon something by the pool, leaving him speechless. Before long, Hinata saw his face and arched an eyebrow. Hinata questioned, a little startled by her own stutter, What is it?" Since she was 8 years old, she had not stumbled. Naruto suddenly materialized close to the reflecting pool's edge and knelt down. "Why?" he asked, holding his dropped ramen cups with tears in his eyes. Hinata's perspiration fell when she said, "They were innocent bystanders." She approached Naruto slowly. Hinata was not aware of the moisture in the air gradually forming over her as she did so. The kidnapper grinned menacingly from beneath the water, and water needles emerged over the two. However, Naruto turned and noticed the needles in the air because he could feel the increased moisture in the air. As the needles moved to puncture Hinata, he swiftly swapped her for himself. Naruto felt the water needles pierce him from all sides, and his eyes widened. Gah! His breathing became more difficult as he spat out the blood that was flowing through his mouth. Hinata knelt next to Naruto, who was gazing at the ground with vacant cerulean eyes, and said, "Hey, are you okay?" His blood replaced the water needles that spread and flowed out of his wounds. After closing his eyes, Naruto collapsed onto his face. "Hey." When Hinata looked up and saw the man standing motionless over the pool, she exclaimed, "That brat is dead." He approached them slowly, a smirk on his lips as he said, "You should have fled when you had the chance." Hinata assumed her gentle fist stance as she stood in front of Naruto. Hinata yelled, "Stop right there," while glaring at the man while using her Byakugan. The man kept moving toward her and Naruto, ignoring her. Her muscles stiffened. There was little she could do to hurt this man. He was stronger and more skilled than she was, and she would probably die before she could hit him. A second later, he kicked her back and was in her face. Her kidnapper grabbed Naruto and threw him into the pool as she rolled back and flipped to her feet. The image of the moon rippling from beneath the water was the last thing Naruto saw before he passed out. Gasping for breath, Kushina sat up and used her right hand to hold her neck. She was forced to accept the air and expel her breath as a sudden rush of oxygen filled her lungs, causing her to pant heavily. Kushina reflected, that dream felt too real. She took a moment to catch her breath after wiping the perspiration from her forehead. As she did, she tossed the blanket back idly, exposing creamy legs, which she then swung over the bed's edge and stood up. She wore only a black tank top and black satin panties. She floated to the bathroom with grace and headed directly for the sink. After turning it on, she doused her face with cold water. With a sigh, she raised herself with her arms. She had to visit Minato. Now she had to speak to him. She also knew exactly where he would be right now. Kushina discovered Minato in the precise spot she had imagined him to be in. He stood in front of a big stone with his arms still by his side, his shoulders hunched, and his head drooping forward. There was a photograph in his right hand, but it was too dark to make out what it was. However, Kushina knew whose picture it was, so it made no difference. She approached him slowly, her stance and manner solemn. His body shivered when she was just a few feet away, and he turned to look at her slowly. When his wife's sad azure eyes met his own, he stopped and couldn't help but smile. When Minato saw her, a glimmer of life appeared in his otherwise lifeless eyes, which caused Kushina to smile as well. She put her head on his shoulder blades and nuzzled them tenderly as she hummed a reassuring, sleepy tune and gave him a back hug. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" Kushina groaned wearily as she felt his body vibrate a little from his voice. Half of her mouth was stifled by his back as she replied, "I should." He laughed a little in amusement. He asked, feeling her nod, "Another dream?" He waited calmly while he allowed his wife to gather her thoughts and express them. "What happened?" he asked. She chewed her bottom lip and made Minato turn and give her a strong hug without forcing air out of her lungs. He was drowning, sinking deeper into the water, but the water was red, like blood, but I could tell it wasn't. His eyes were glassy and lifeless and his body was covered with cuts and bruises. Then, she paused. "It's okay, take your time." As she shivered and sighed under his grip, his words gave her more comfort than she had anticipated. Suddenly, the Kyuubi emerges from the abyss and eats Naruto whole. Minato's shirt was stained with tears, but he was unaware of it and wouldn't have cared even if he had. Her voice trembled as she added, "He looked so young." With a gentle hum and a tighter hug, Minato silenced her. Minato gave her a gentle back rub and reassured her, it was just a dream. Blinking, Kushina glanced up at Minato, her violet eyes glimmering with a little fight. Her voice grew louder as she said, That's just it, Minato. I don't think it's just a dream. Minato couldn't help but wonder why. Both of them had a vague suspicion that Naruto was still alive, but they never investigated further. It appeared that the moment had arrived. When he innocently asked, "What do you mean?" she turned to her right, her cheeks flushed pink and her eyes a little embarrassed. Minato noticed her hesitation to express her opinions and raised an eyebrow, saying, "You're going to think I'm crazy." He gave a headshake. He laughed when he saw the glare she gave him. "There are millions of reasons why I should think you're crazy," he said. She sighed, "But I don't. Now tell me." Minato grinned as he heard the conviction supporting her statement, "Maybe he is alive." Minato was aware of Kushina's strength and said, "Actually, I'm willing to bet anything that he is." She had no trouble catching up to any male who questioned her success, and she was proud to be one. All things considered, she was a strong, formidable, defensive, and difficult-to-defeat fortress. She did, however, appear to be a damsel in distress at times. Minato could count on one hand how many times she had performed that role. It was as common as a lunar eclipse for her to display vulnerability. It was one of those rare moments when he looked into her eyes and saw vulnerability and desperation dancing there. His answer seemed to be exactly what Kushina was looking for because her eyes brightened. "Me too." He grinned as his azure eyes gazed up at the moon. "But for now, we have to be patient. One day, Kushina-chan, we'll see him again." Kushina simply gazed at him with affection and a hint of incredulity. "And when that day comes, we'll be a family again." Minato's gaze returned to her as she asked, "How can you be so sure?" His smile grew and his eyes wrinkled. As Kushina grinned broadly and gave him a tight embrace, tears welled up in her eyes. "He has Uzumaki and Namikaze blood. He's alive out there. That much I can be sure of." He gestured back and looked at the big stone he had been staring at. Hiruzen Sarutobi was a name that he held in the highest regard. Naruto Namikaze fades from the stone as the moonlight reflects off of it. Naruto's vision was hazy when he opened his eyes. Even if he had perfect vision, all he would see would be water, so it didn't matter. It wasn't just any water, either. It was a deep shade of red. His thoughts were disorganized, racing from one vague and foreign idea to another. Naruto took a moment to gather himself before realizing that he was rising to the top of the red water rather than sinking. As he blinked, he became aware of yet another oddity. He was still breathing while submerged. He simply waited until his head and the rest of his body came to the surface, at which point he noticed that, aside from his right, 3 walls encircled him. The room was large, and the shadows even covered the ceiling. Naruto couldn't see the precise source of the red light, but it was coming from somewhere. Metal bars ran continuously down into the water and up to the ceiling to his right. There was a note that said, "Seal," on the center bar. With his eyes fixed on the darkness, Naruto droning, "Why am I not surprised?" He stared into the darkness as his body slowly floated to the bars. When 3 nails 10 times his size attempted to cut through the bars and tear him to pieces, he didn't blink, nor did he flinch when red eyes appeared out of nowhere. A growl reverberated throughout the room, and Naruto interpreted it as a, "Yes. Still hostile? I'm guessing you still don't like me? You brat," came from inside the steel bars in a rough, irate voice. Naruto shook his head and said, "Set me free. I am done being your battery." As he sat up and rolled his shoulders to remove the crick in his neck, Naruto denied, "No can do, I still need you." Naruto stood up, went to the cage, and touched it with his right hand, saying, "Speaking of which, I need some of it now." Naruto ignored the coldness of the steel beneath his palm as he watched the red chakra of the Kyuubi begin to envelop him and ascend his arm. His eyes turned from cerulean to crimson in the blink of an eye, and he could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins and his heart starting to race. He doubled over as a sudden fit of coughing struck, causing his eyes to widen. He struggled to catch his breath, clutching for his heart. As he watched Naruto gather his thoughts, the chakra fox sneered, "Fool. Serves you right. You know you're at your limit." The Kyuubi then made a hazy shoulder motion that resembled a shrug. With a sneer at the Kyuubi, Naruto threw his right fist back and punched the bars, saying, "It's not like I care, though. I enjoy seeing you suffer." A high-pitched tone reverberated throughout the room as the bars vibrated. The Kyuubi snarled and flinched. Naruto pushed himself off the bars and strode to the other side of the room, growling, "Shut the hell up." Abruptly, a door opened, and Naruto crossed the threshold. He turned and gave the beast a final passive glance before he left the Kyuubi's sight. The door vanished as he shook his head and walked away, leaving the Kyuubi staring at another wall. He thrashed furiously for his host, growling as he did so. The Kyuubi halted, letting go of his anger and occasionally growling to release the last of his aggression. His face abruptly turned into a cunning smile. and he began to laugh as he retreated into the shadowed side of his cage and closed his eyes. His laugh soon became a full-fledged fit of mania as he said, "When you return, my host, there will be a surprise waiting for you." When Naruto's eyes opened, he was no longer gazing up at the moon. As he called forth the Kyuubi's chakra and surrounded him with it, they squinted. As he prepared his body for the impending fight, he ignored the violent cough that came out of his lips. Round 2. As she hid from her assailant, Hinata panted as softly as she could, saying, "Come out, little Hyuga." She gave it her all in an attempt to defend herself, but the man managed to survive. Although it was still dangerous, she still possessed one jutsu that she had never used. As she led on, she was unsure of her own skills, especially when it came to creating the jutsu. The sound of water rushing, gradually growing louder, caused Hinata to gasp. She watched as the tree she was hiding behind was washed away as a wave of water ripped at it as she leapt. Hinata exclaimed, "Gotcha," as her assailant seized and twisted her right arm behind her back. The man raised her arm to excruciating heights and twisted it, asking, "Thought you could get away?" Hinata let out a whimper, but she did not let out a gasp or a cry of agony. She prevented her assailant from taking pleasure in her suffering by biting down on them. The Hyuga heiress let out a loud yell as he snapped at her silence and pulled Hinata's arm away from her shoulder. He kicked her back and let go of her arm, knocking her to the ground. Tears were streaming from her eyes as she gripped her arm. With occasional howls of pain and cries, she lay flat on her stomach. A sickening popping sound echoed through the forest as the man approached Hinata and stepped on her right shoulder while grinning sickly. With a feigned concern, the man asked, "What's the matter?" She screamed once more as he seized her right shoulder and violently flipped her onto her back. "Does it hurt that much?" Hinata wanted nothing more than to permanently silence the man, despite the pain. She held her arm while she turned her head away from him. It wasn't until the tip of the kunai touched her skin that she realized he had removed it and placed it directly over her heart. After that, she remained motionless. As the man reared the kunai back, Hinata closed her eyes and said, "Here, let me put you out of your misery." He was about to thrust the kunai into Hinata's heart when he shivered with a sudden sense of dread. He noticed bubbles when he turned to face the reflecting pool. Is he still alive? As he went back to concentrating on Hinata and taking her life, the man swore. The man gasped as evil, tainted chakra filled the room before he could even move his hand. What on earth is this? Fear crept into Hinata's heart as her eyes snapped open. This chakra, it's not human. A red chakra hand suddenly exploded through the ground and seized the man from beneath the assailant. It soared through the air, then descended and slammed him to the floor. The chakra hand retracted to the hole from which it had come, kicking up dust that surrounded the man. The assailant held his head, trying to stop his vision from trembling, and fell asleep, saying, "What the hell?" Naruto was standing over the water in his demon cloak when he turned to face the reflecting pool. He stared at the man, his eyes hard and cold. Who the he? Naruto began to laugh, interrupting the man. Naruto questioned, "Just who the hell do you think I am?" In an instant, Naruto sprinted down the distance between himself and his assailant, declaring, "I'm Naruto. Naruto of the Blazing Gale, and I won't fall to you." Naruto grabbed the man's neck and pushed him further into the ground before he could react. The man clutched Naruto's wrists and grunted. Grinning, the man fell into a pool of water. Naruto spun around and was struck in the face with a sharp blow, which sent him flying back. "Why do you continue fighting? She's a lost cause." He straightened up and gave the man who had been standing where he had been a fierce look. Naruto could tell the man was serious when he said, "This is your last chance. Leave now and I'll spare your life." He was prepared to let Naruto escape this battle unscathed. He snarled, "Don't underestimate me." Naruto yelled as he charged at the man once more, this time with more vigor and determination. He spit out a stream of fire. Fire style. Running fire. He yelled, encircling the man. He inhaled deeply and made more hand signals. Wind style. Divine wind. Naruto's mouth erupted in several tornadoes that raced toward his assailant. As they attacked the man from all sides, the tornadoes sucked up the fire and turned into tornadoes of flame. The man made quick hand gestures and conjured up a wall of water to defend himself, and his eyes grew wide. Unfortunately for him, the water wall was struck by the first wave of flaming tornadoes and was blasted away. When he looked up after landing on his butt, he saw the second wave of tornadoes collide and burst upon impact. The man was out of Naruto's line of sight as water and dust were thrown into the air. After patiently waiting for the dust to settle, Naruto found his assailant nowhere to be seen. The only other person he saw when he looked around was Hinata, who was staring at him and holding her right arm. Just as a torrent of kunai rushed in his direction, he flipped away. He scowled in their direction, but he couldn't see anyone. Hinata couldn't stop staring at Naruto as he looked for the kidnapper. That's the name of the Yondaimi's son. Hinata's heart thumping in her chest, she thought, Naruto Namikaze. There is no way this is a coincidence. Come out, you coward. Datbeo, Naruto yelled angrily, his adrenaline pumping forth. Hinata perspired. Ka-san would probably say something like that. Naruto? Naruto asked, turning to find his sensei looking at him bewildered. Naruto looked around as Deidara asked, what happened? He paused to sniff the air and discovered that he was far from the man's scent. He snarled and was on the verge of locating the bastard when he collapsed to his knees due to a violent coughing fit. With the Kyuubi's demon cloak dissipating, Naruto felt his energy drain. He fell on his face and lost consciousness, his vision blurred and his eyes glassy. Deidara hurried over to examine Naruto. He needed to see a doctor, but he wasn't going to die. When he looked up, he saw Hinata attempting to sit up after hearing a tiny voice moan. He asked, "You okay?" And Hinata found it difficult to simply nod. Deidara called forth a clone, who picked up Hinata while the original threw Naruto onto his shoulders. "Come on, I'll take you to the hospital along with my student." The clone chuckled slightly as he sensed Hinata's tension. Hinata just stared at him before turning to face the unconscious blonde. "It's okay, you'll be healed in no time." With a head tilt and a hum, the clone said, If you don't mind me asking." Hinata asked, "Who is that boy?" And the clone gave Naruto a fraternal smile. The clone said, pausing to consider, "He's Naruto." The clone shook his head and started to follow the original as they made their way to the hospital. Although, he is trying to add, the Blazing Gale, to the end of his name. Not bad, but it'll be a while before it catches on. Hinata kept thinking about the boy who had saved her as they went. The Blazing Gale's Naruto? She gave a slight smile as she started to feel sleepy. Not bad. Humming to herself, Hinata gazed at the ceiling before blinking, letting out a sigh, and turning to face Naruto, who was sleeping, to her left. A doctor arrived and told her about her injuries after she woke up from the events of the previous night. Her right arm hung in a sling because it was dislocated and would take around 2 months to heal fully. Then, her temporary roommate caught the doctor's attention. The doctor was, to use an understatement, shocked. He was shocked beyond belief that Naruto was even breathing. "Damn," was the only thing the doctor said before hurriedly leaving. Hinata was certain that Naruto was anything but normal, but she wasn't sure what that meant. She wasn't entirely shocked to see the doctor react that way, given what she already knew about him prior to the kidnapping. Ka-san did point out that Jinchuriki's healing rate was always remarkable. Even Hinata had to respect Naruto's will to live, though. Additionally, Ka-san informed her that if the Jinchuriki lacked a will to live, the healing rate would be useless. His resolve was admirable given how awful he looked the other night and the fact that all he needed to do was sleep away the wounds without being connected to any machines. But when Hinata thought of the boy with the blonde hair, she thought of more than just that word. He was an honorable man. Teenager, with a strong jutsu, strength, and speed arsenal. In addition, he had a good appearance. His muscles appeared to be immobile and rock hard, resembling a boulder. Blushing, Hinata averted her gaze and kept staring at the ceiling while berating herself in her head. At least not personally, she didn't even know him. She only knew that he was the son of the Yondaime. Hinata looked back at Naruto and muttered, "Yondaime's son." Just as the blonde man from yesterday appeared, she heard footsteps and turned away. When he noticed Hinata staring back at him, he blinked, but then he composed himself and grinned. With a laugh, Deidara said, "You're awake." After giving a nod, Hinata moved to join Naruto. Hinata heard a slight smile on his face, but no laughter in his voice as he said, "He sure took a beating." Deidara continued to stare at him before turning to Hinata. "Who did this?" he asked in a tone as icy as the land of spring's weather, making Hinata shiver unconsciously. She hesitantly replied, "I'm not sure." She didn't want to be the target of his unexpected rage. Hinata detested her stutter. He told me was that it was his mission to kidnap me. She only stammered when under a lot of stress, when she was extremely afraid, or when she felt ashamed, ever since her Ka-san helped her with her shyness. At the moment, the man was intimidating her. What if he decided to kill her because she was a burden or no longer useful to him? What assurances did she have that she wouldn't be abandoned by him and Naruto, even if he wasn't like that? She was unsure of her location. With a muttered curse, Deidara made his way to the door. Hinata yelled, "Wait," with a start, but she didn't regret it when she saw him turn and stop. The straight line on his lips changed to a tiny smile when she asked, "Where am I?" He shook his head slowly and replied, "Hoshigakure." Hinata's eyes widened and she sat up straight when she heard, Konoha is only a 3 days travel from here. Despite his laughter, Deidara shook his head and asked, "Why? You know who I am?" Hinata bit her bottom lip as Deidara responded, "Not personally, but all I had to do was look at your eyes and I immediately knew that you're a Hyuga." Then, "Why are you being so nice to me? Aren't you from Iwagakure?" Deidara gave Naruto a final glance as soon as the question was posed. Still understanding what he was saying, Hinata nodded slowly. "We might hate Konoha but we're still human." Hinata arched an eyebrow, but Deidara left the room before she could ask any more questions. "At any rate, get some rest, we'll be leaving soon." With a sigh, she reclined, her heart and mind pounding. By that, what did he mean? After giving it some thought, Hinata turned back to Naruto. She couldn't believe she had located the Yondaimi's son, no matter how many times she looked at him. It was a once-in a lifetime experience, a kind of miracle. His resemblance to his father was unsettling. In fact, aside from the hair, he resembled his mother more when viewed closely. She thought he was the son of the Yondaime, but it was only the hair. Hinata let out a low moan, tossed her feet over the bed, and rose slowly. She straightened up and looked at Naruto again after stretching her back. She cautiously walked to the chair on the left of his bed and sat down, taking small steps. Hinata checked to make sure she wouldn't fall off, then gulped and held out her left hand. She hesitated to touch his whiskered cheek as it slowly made its way across the distance between them. What if he became conscious? If he witnessed her doing this, would he think she was strange? Would he become irate? When Hinata's hand finally touched his skin after she swallowed her hesitation, she couldn't help but smile at her earlier fear when he didn't flinch. When he groaned and licked his lips, she pulled her hand away. With a sigh of relief, she resolved not to touch him once more. She simply gazed at him while considering her next move. Should she try to persuade Naruto to return, or should she inform the Yondaime of her discovery? Is there anything she should do? She should, of course. She was aware that if she did nothing, she would feel as though she was betraying her Ka-san and the Yondaime. However, what should she do? Will Naruto comply? Before Naruto groaned once more, she sat there for hours without thinking. He had a silly smile on his face and a little drool dripping from the corner of his mouth when she looked at him. He muttered, "Ramen. Ramen. Ramen." And Hinata burst out laughing. It was just so damn cute, in her opinion. At the final remark, Hinata blinked. Ramen. Stupid fox. Was the Kyuubi in his dream? She saw his silly face turn to a frustrated one. I wonder what's on his mind. At the cage before him, Naruto snarled. There was ramen everywhere in his dream, and it was all free. The Kyuubi are laughing somewhere inside the cage as he stands in front of it. He would have noticed that the Kyuubi's laugh was different if he wasn't so furious. Naruto yelled, "What the hell do you want?" His anger subsided when he saw red eyes emerge from the shadows, knowing that the Kyuubi would respond. He did observe, though, that the eyes had a gleam in them and were much smaller than normal. Naruto simply saw a kind of lust in its eyes, if he read them correctly. What the devil? At long last, Naruto let out enough rage to notice the difference in the Kyuubi's laughter. There was more feminine? The soft, seductive voice behind the steel bars made Naruto's eyes widen. I see you've noticed my host. Naruto stammered in shock. Kyuubi? From inside the cage came another female laugh. At last, Naruto managed to catch a glimpse of a silhouette from within the cage. Naruto gasped as the silhouette finally emerged into view. Actually, my name is Yoko. As a girl, the Kyuubi stood there. Not a girl, please. A female. She had long, bright red hair, a red kimono that elegantly accentuated her curves with a yellow obi, and was of average height for a woman. Her 9 bushy red tails and animalistic golden red eyes with a slitted pupil were what attracted Naruto's attention, even though her breasts were stunningly large without appearing overbearing or exaggerated. She gave Naruto a shiver, and he couldn't help but blush as it began to appear on his cheeks. This time, Yoko's laughter at the flush on his face pulled Naruto out of his stunned state. Angry, Naruto yelled, "Wah! What the hell is going on?" She stopped laughing and looked at Naruto with a wry smile. Naruto's gaze instantly shifted to her enormous breasts, which at the time appeared intriguing, as she rested her right shoulder on the steel bars while crossing her arms beneath her chest. Naruto growled as Yoko teased in a seductive tone, "I didn't know you were so perverted, host. I see you're enjoying my original form." Naruto countered, hoping to take the smile off her face, but he wasn't prepared for her to laugh. "What the hell do you mean your original form? I thought you were always a stupid fox living inside my belly. And I always thought you were a boy. Male." Naruto raised an eyebrow in response to the statement, "Not everything is as it seems, my host." Naruto questioned cautiously, and what exactly do you mean by that? Simply because I appeared in front of you in the form of a fox with a deep voice doesn't mean I'm not a woman. Yoko answered patiently. She reiterated, not everything is as it seems. Naruto kept glancing up and down at Yoko with skepticism. Does this form not please you? Yoko grinned as her form began to change and she glowed. Her eyes turned pink, her breasts perked up, and her hair went black and short in a matter of seconds. The color of her bushy tails also darkened. Naruto shook his head and asked, does this please you more? Looking and sounding like a nine-tailed Kurotsuchi doesn't make this any less awkward. If anything, I'm a little bit disturbed to have my teammate locked in a cage inside my gut. Yoko smiled and began to glow once more. This time, her breasts grew, her eyes turned a light lavender, and her hair grew longer and took on a raven blue tint. Except for the tips, which turned as white as snow, her tails also took on a raven hue. Naruto gasped as he gazed at Yoko in the shape of the girl he had saved. How is this, master? He asked. She lulled him to approach her with her gentle, comforting voice. She blinked, flushed, and repeatedly averted her gaze before re-establishing it. Naruto appeared to be startled out of his reverie by the question, do you like it? And crossed his arms. Whatever. Naruto turned his head away, blushing as well. With a giggle, Yoko transformed back into herself. Now that he remembered the subject of his lovely dream, Naruto asked with a little less patience, okay, let's say I believe you were always a woman with a weird knack to change into a male fox. What now? Is this what you brought me out of my sweet, sweet dream for? Yoko simply gave a headshake. Yoko surprised Naruto by saying, I have decided to cooperate with you. What? Yoko trailed off, allowing her unspoken message to enter Naruto's mind. You heard me, my host. This argument between us has gone far enough. Yesterday showed me that our fighting will be the death of us. Should I have been more cooperative, you might have killed the man. It was fate that allowed your sensei to come when he did, for if he didn't. She turned her head away, her face sad. Naruto actually questioned whether she was acting because it appeared so real. Yoko paused and appeared to pause for a moment before stepping back, kneeling, and bowing so low that her forehead was only an inch from touching the water's surface. Regardless, I have seen the error of my ways and I plan to make up for my previous actions. She looked up, and Naruto made eye contact with her. I'd like to apologize for my past behavior and hope to help you in the future. He stepped back when he saw them flash for a millisecond. Naruto inhaled deeply and let out a sigh. He firmly believed that if the Kyuubi truly collaborated with him, it would be beneficial. However, he had a gut feeling that he should simply refuse. The only thing he needed was her chakra, however. Slowly, Naruto uttered, I guess that makes sense. He gave Yoko another look and then sighed in frustration. Yoko's eyes widened, clearly not anticipating that response. But no. Naruto turned to lean against one of the walls as she asked, why not? Her shocked expression wavered, and she took on a sad yet accepted expression. The only thing I need from you is your chakra and you don't have a say in whether I get it or not. I don't care what you look like, I don't want or need your advice or whatever else you have to offer. You are my chakra battery, nothing more, nothing less. Yoko stood and crossed her arms under her chest once more, saying, I see. You do not trust me yet. That's fine, my host. I can wait. I can wait for the day that I can show you my loyalty. Naruto turned and scoffed. We'll see. Yoko grinned as Naruto vanished. One day, kid, you will learn to trust me. As she gazed into space, Hinata asked herself, should I tell him now? She looked at him and bit her bottom lip, asking, should I wait? Hinata sighed and cupped her face in her palms. What can I say without sounding crazy? Hello, how are you? Thanks for saving me. By the way, you're the Yondaimi's son, so what are you doing in Iwa? He's going to think I'm crazy. This is harder than I thought. What is? Hinata yelled, eek, and spun around to see Naruto yawning silently while extending his arms and back. When he saw Hinata, he instantly smiled and opened his cerulean eyes. He looked away with a faint blush that was barely perceptible as he recalled what the Kyuubi had shown him in his mind. He re-established eye contact, grinned, and coughed into his bald, upright fist. Hinata's blush darkened as Naruto asked, so, what's harder than you thought? Naruto blinked and cocked his head in bewilderment, saying, Anyo. It's nothing now that I think about it. Hinata found his expression endearing. Just as Naruto opened his mouth to speak, Hinata spoke first. Hinata mentally cursed her stutter and felt ashamed that she had done so in front of Naruto. Anyo, thanks for saving me. But he was only listening to what she was saying, not her stutter. It caused his eyes to wrinkle and his smile to widen. He tilted his head once more and arched an eyebrow before saying, "No problem, I couldn't let some old man kidnap a girl." Hinata paused before answering, "If you don't mind me asking, why did he do that anyway?" Hinata replied, "I'm the heiress from my clan." Although it was far from the truth, it wasn't a total lie. Not just any Hyuga, but the Hyuga heiress was abducted by accident. Hyuga blood was the only prerequisite on the insane kidnapper's ill wish list. Even though Hinata was overqualified, the man didn't care because Hyuga blood was Hyuga blood regardless of how prestigious it was. What caused Hinata to pause before responding was the question, "I see. From what clan?" What if he was aware that Konoha was the home of the Hyuga clan? Hinata and Naruto turned to face the door and noticed his teammates staring at them. "Naruto. You're awake. I should probably go tell Deidara. Sensei." Daichi nodded at Hinata and Naruto before departing, while Kurotsuchi stood inside the room and Daichi stood between the room and the hallway. Kurotsuchi was the only one left, and he cautiously eyed Hinata before making his way to Naruto. She was trouble, in Kurotsuchi's opinion, and had to be destroyed before she posed a serious threat. The air became thicker when Kurotsuchi sat on the other side of the bed, and Hinata could sense the negative aura that surrounded him. When Hinata and Kurotsuchi looked at each other, sparks flew. Kurotsuchi forced a smile with flames in her eyes, while Hinata smiled courteously. Hinata was not unaware of this. After focusing on him, Kurotsuchi asked, "How are you, Naruto-kun?" With genuine concern. Naruto merely grinned. At this, Kurotsuchi grinned broadly and turned back to Hinata, who saw the glare in her eyes. "I'm fine, Kurotsuchi. A bit sore, but nothing a little training can't beat out." Naruto arched an eyebrow at this, saying, "I heard what happened. Sensei told us. Anyway, that was really brave what you did." Naruto dismissed the compliment with a shrug, but Hinata grinned and put a gentle hand on his right forearm. It was nothing. She didn't know what made her do it, and she probably would have apologized, blushed, and backpedaled if she had been with Naruto alone. Hinata made the final statement solemnly, "It was more than nothing. If it wasn't for you, I would probably be dead. Or worse." Naruto rubbed the back of his head and grinned sheepishly as Kurotsuchi rolled her eyes. His smile brightened when he noticed Hinata's shy smile. "Well, maybe that's true. But don't make a big deal out of it. Anyone in my position would have done the same." Naruto disregarded Kurotsuchi's muttered statement, "I wouldn't." Hinata kept smiling. She didn't appear to be listening to what Kurotsuchi had to say. Hinata was freaking out inside when she said, "But, I still want to pay you back in some way." "What is the source of these words?" Her brain shouted. "Before you get too deep, stop." Hinata's only visible reaction to her thoughts was a flush on her cheeks, but even that didn't stop her luscious lips from smiling, which caused Naruto's smile to grow. What does this girl believe herself to be? Kurotsuchi thought sharply as she gave Hinata a dagger-like glare. As Hinata's forwardness began to creep into Naruto's heart, he said, "It's fine, really." To be honest, he appreciated her direct but courteous manner. It was a welcome diversion from the usual Iwa girls. However, he had never received as much attention from a girl as Hinata was. There was Kurotsuchi, but that didn't matter because they were teammates. Hinata gave a headshake. As Kurotsuchi perspired and Naruto's cheeks flushed with shame, he said, "I remember you mourning over the ramen last night." He glanced at Kurotsuchi and thought, "Great, now I won't hear the end of it from Kurotsuchi." The eyes of Naruto and Kurotsuchi widened as he said, "Let me treat you to some ramen. If it weren't for me, they wouldn't have been ruined." No fair. Cheating. That is, free ramen is impossible for him. With her eyes burning and her face flushed, Kurotsuchi thought frantically. Well. Naruto grinned broadly as he glanced at the ceiling. He's getting free ramen from a pretty girl. How was he able to refuse? Hinata added, "Please?" as she glanced toward Kurotsuchi out of the corner of her eye. Naruto was unable to resist when Hinata finished it off with a cute pout. Naruto replied, "Okay, fine." Hinata gave him a cute little smile and wrinkled her eyes. Kurotsuchi stared in disbelief and mild discomfort at the two. It was Hinata's turn to be shocked. "It's funny, it's like you just asked me out on a date." In essence, she asked him out on a date. It was her first time going on a date. Then, with her eyes closed and her mind racing, she passed out and leaned back in the chair. Naruto began to panic and asked, "Hey, you okay? We need help? Someone call a doctor?" Kurotsuchi grinned at Hinata's misfortune of fainting in front of Naruto, despite the fact that she essentially lost their first date to a random girl. After 24 hours, in an attempt to control his rage, Minato sighed into his hand. He didn't like Kurenai's response when he inquired about Hinata, even though she and her team had just been debriefed. Minato arched an eyebrow and said, I don't know. Minato, somewhat irate that Kurenai was unaware of the whereabouts of his goddaughter, retorted, You don't know? You're her sensei, it's your duty to know. Kurenai stopped to bite her lower lip before saying, Yondaime. Sama, I know you care about Hinata. I feel the same, so please, bear with me. She was kidnapped. Minato simply gazed at Kurenai, his expression emotionless and passive. Despite feeling uneasy due to his intense gaze, she refused to back down. Kurenai nodded when Minato said, Kidnapped? He scowled because he detested the word, kidnap. The memory brought back memories of the day Naruto was born and died. Reluctantly, she stated, It's the only thing that makes sense. The last place she was in was a watery battlefield. With a deep sigh, Kurenai ducked her head and said, I'm sorry, I've let you, Hyuga. Sama. And all of Konoha down. Hinata was like her younger sister, and she felt awful. No, she was gone now, and she was her younger sister. Kurenai was so distraught by this turn of events that Minato could see it. He closed his eyes and thought. Kurenai's body relaxed as the tension in the air began to release. Kurenai noticed when Minato opened his eyes that she was addressing Minato Namikaze, a friend and family man, rather than the Yondaime Hokage of Konohagakure. Kurenai didn't feel much better after hearing the words, Don't be too hard on yourself, Kurenai. In this kind of situation, there wasn't much you could have done. Kurenai couldn't help but smile when Minato said, We're going to find her, I promise. She could tell he was serious by the resolve that ignited in his eyes. Doubting his word would be incredibly foolish because he was going to find Hinata. Kurenai gave a nod. Kurenai confidently said, I'm sure you will be able to pull this off, Hokage. Sama. Minato nodded and smiled briefly before returning to her formal and serious demeanor. Kurenai's eyes widened slightly as he said, I'll be sending a search team to find her. The team will include my students, a Hyuga, and myself. With an abrupt nod, Minato asked, You're going? I told you we're going to find her, I'm included in the, he stated to her. But what of the village? Who'll watch over it while you're away? Asked Kurenai. Minato's cheerful smile and a loud shout from outside the office served as her response. Kurenai turned to face the door as it exploded open, allowing a red blur to pass by her and land on Minato. Move, out of my way, Minato, she exclaimed. The chair moved backward until it struck the wall due to Kushina's glomp. When Minato saw Kurenai's unasked question on her face, he nodded his head and laughed aloud. With a tone full of laughter, Minato clarified, Meet your new Hokage until further notice. Kushina looked at Minato as if he were insane, blinking. What? Minato asked, smiling as he gave her a naive kiss. Kushina nodded reluctantly as Minato whispered, I'll tell you about it later. He looked at Kurenai, who had a composed look on his face. Minato could see a hint of relief on her face, though it was nearly impossible to see. To what end he did not know. If there isn't anything else, Kurenai. Actually, Kurenai said, cutting in. Minato grinned at her commitment to her student and said, I'd like to be in the search team. Kurenai stood motionless for a moment before nodding. I'm sorry, Kurenai, but you have to stay here. You have your other two students to think about. You're right. Kushina was frantically curious about what was happening as she watched this unfold. Minato was too preoccupied with Kurenai to notice her staring at him. But she could wait, it was all right. Kurenai nodded her head and walked away without saying anything more. You're dismissed. Minato rubbed his temples and sighed. When his wife coughed, he looked up at her and laughed sheepishly. You've got some explaining to do. After telling Kushina everything, Minato had requested some privacy. After getting his response to her question about what he wanted for dinner, she departed. At that point, Minato created a shadow clone to handle the paperwork while he slipped away and let loose some repressed rage in a covert training facility. Now he was surrounded by smoldering boulders, fallen trees, and gouges of all sizes in the ground. He wore black Anbu pants, had no shirt on, and was drenched in sweat. He surveyed his surroundings and chuckled. Perhaps Kushina was correct, perhaps he occasionally took training too seriously. Minato put on his white shirt and vanished in a flash of yellow, saying, I should probably get the team together. A day had passed since Hinata had dared to ask Naruto out. She was free to dress and do as she pleased until Naruto and his group brought her to Iwa, except for the fact that her right arm was in a sling. Why? She didn't know. Perhaps Naruto's insistence and complaining that they shouldn't abandon her there had something to do with it. However, it frightened her. Hinata was certain that she would hardly receive any better treatment than a prisoner of war if she went into Iwa. She shook her head in an attempt to temporarily forget that small detail before continuing. Hinata and Naruto had developed a close relationship over the past 24 hours. They spent hours upon hours talking about anything that came to mind, and they didn't part ways to prepare until 2 hours ago. Feeling her heart pound against her chest, Hinata covered it with her hand. Naruto always made her feel special when they spoke. It was more about Hinata feeling special than anything he was doing. He focused entirely on her, something that few people do. She would stutter more than normal and her heart would race. If she hadn't been unable to maintain eye contact with him for very long before feeling as though she was about to faint, she wouldn't normally give it much more thought. Is she falling in love with the blonde? Although she wasn't impossible, was she? Must she? In any case, Hinata couldn't resist fingering the hem of her sundress as she had just a few minutes before she would be meeting Naruto for ramen. She was fortunate to always have cash on her person whenever she left the house. Her family's relative wealth was also fortunate. She had enough money for 10 people's worth of ramen and some extra for the sundress. The end of the light blue dress, which had spaghetti straps, fell just below her knees. Her creamy cheeks were flushed, and her lavender eyes gazed at the open-toed sandals that were included free of charge with the dress. The same thoughts tormented her mind as she did. What am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? Am I crazy? And why must my heart beat so quickly? Hinata was so preoccupied with these unresolved questions that she failed to notice Naruto approach from behind and tap her right shoulder. When she saw Hinata's anguished expression, she flinched, jumped, and turned to see Naruto's smile turn into a worried one. He said, "Sorry." Hinata shook her head and smiled, calming the ache in her arm. When Naruto finally noticed what she was wearing, he looked her up and down and said, It's okay." She looked stunning. When Hinata saw how intently he was examining her, she flushed. "Wow," was all Naruto could say before he looked away with his own blush and blinked owlishly. Hinata gave him a shy smile, and she couldn't help but be pleased by his response. Many men complimented her and made cat calls on her way to the ramen restaurant. She was accustomed to it. As the heiress of a prominent clan, she frequently received compliments on her beauty from men and suitors, so it wasn't particularly unusual. However, she was unable to identify a plausible explanation for her blushing. With a charming grin, Hinata said, "Thank you." Naruto then smiled back. He gestured for her to go ahead of him as he opened the door. She bowed and giggled before she and Naruto went into the restaurant. There were at least 10 tables arranged throughout the space, with the counter at the far end. The room's decor was visually appealing without being overly ornate. 2 other couples were present, but they were absorbed in their own worlds. Hinata sat down as the 2 shinobi approached an arbitrary table. Naruto shook her head and said, "I'm going to go order the ramen. What do you want?" Hinata said to him, "I'm treating you to ramen, forget about me." Naruto laughed joyfully. "I'd feel bad if I'm the only one who ate." Hinata had to look away in order to say no. It's okay." Before heading to the counter to place his ramen order, Naruto continued to gaze at her. Knowing that she would have given in if he had asked again, Hinata sighed. After a few seconds, he came back and took a seat in front of Hinata. There was awkward silence around them as they grinned at one another. They both wanted to say something, anything at all, but they couldn't think of anything without coming across as foolish. When the brown-haired waitress came by and brought them each a cup of water with a straw, they each gave Kami a mental thank you. After expressing their gratitude, they resumed their awkward eye contact. So, Drew led Naruto. A smile flickered to the corner of Hinata's mouth as her eyes grew brighter. "What's your name?" Hinata bowed her head so low that she nearly tapped the top of the table, barely missing her cup of water, and said, "Oh, I'm sorry for my rudeness. My name is Hinata." She hesitated to say Hyuga, questioning whether Naruto would know as much as his sensei. Naruto gave a silly smile and accepted the response before she could make up her mind. Hinata squeaked and slowly nodded. "In a sunny place?" "I like it." Hinata smiled despite her heart hammering against her chest. She took a sip of the water after wrapping 2 small fingers around the straw. She swallowed the water and then said, "And you're Naruto?" Naruto gave a nod. Hinata raised an eyebrow and asked, amused, "Naruto of the Blazing Gale?" Naruto rubbed the back of his head and laughed sheepishly. Hinata nodded and giggled as Naruto joked, "Well, it's better than just Naruto." With a louder laugh, Naruto said, "I suppose." When Naruto spoke, Hinata felt the awkwardness and tension of the situation melt away, but when he laughed, she felt her body loosen up. She hadn't felt so at ease since before she started her heiress training. Hinata was unfamiliar with this degree of relaxation. Even though the training wasn't always stressful, she seems to be free to say or do anything without fear of criticism. Hinata chuckled and said, "It's way better than Naruto of the Rocky Fox." Naruto then laughed too. In between chuckles, she remarked, "Sounds like a movie." Naruto couldn't help but nod. Looking back, he did sort of inherit the name from an old move, but at the time, he couldn't remember it. Before they could say anything else, the brunette arrived with a cart full of ramen after their laughter subsided. While Naruto eyeballed the ramen with stars in his eyes, Hinata looked at the cart incredulously. Hinata scowled at the cart and hummed to herself. "That is quite a bit of ramen. Oh my goodness, ramen," happily, Naruto thought. The young brunette pushed the cart in Naruto's direction and said, "10 miso ramen, 3 shrimp, and 1 beef soup for you." She then took a seemingly random ramen off the cart and placed it in front of Hinata, who blinked in surprise. The brunette gave Hinata a smile before leaving the two of them alone once more. "And 1 chicken for the young lady." "Why did you get me one? I'm not." Hinata's stomach rumbled, and her facial color darkened once more. At this, Naruto raised an eyebrow. Hinata's brow furrowed as she said, "Even so, I'm trying to pay you back for saving me." She used her free hand to gently push the bowl back, but Naruto used his own hand to stop her. Naruto begged, "Then do it by eating with me. Please?" Hinata paused, staring at him blankly, then nodded and sighed. After pushing it away from her, Naruto snatched up a bowl of ramen and devoured it all. Hinata was fascinated, amazed, and disgusted by his savage eating, the first 2 more so than the last. When he sighed in satisfaction and went for seconds, she snapped out of it. Hinata shifted her bowl with her chopsticks while glancing down at it. After what felt like seconds of zoning out, she felt a tapping sensation on her forehead. She blinked and glanced up to see Naruto tapping her forehead with the top of his chopsticks and grinning naively. When she noticed 7 empty bowls next to his 8th half empty bowl, her face flushed. She nodded when he asked, "You okay?" Her gaze moved to the left and she said, "Then dig in." Then she paused. "Well." Hinata lifted her right arm as high as she could without injuring herself, saying, "The thing is." With shyness, she concluded, "I'm right-handed." Naruto blushed after blinking. Naruto watched Hinata change colors as fast as a chameleon and asked, "So, do you need help?" She gave a quick shake of her head. Naruto blushed as well. It's okay. Why you don't have to. I mean, if you want, you don't have to. But aren't you hungry? Hinata snarled in her stomach, she turned red. "You are," Hinata said, averting her eyes in shame. At that thought, Hinata stopped herself. "But you don't have to go out of your way for me, again." Hinata bit her lower lip when Naruto insisted, "It's okay, really." Naruto questioned, "What if I made a clone? Would that be better?" Hinata's head cocked to the side. "A clone? A shadow clone?" After giving it some thought, Hinata replied, Anyo. I suppose." When Naruto called forth a clone, it snatched up a chair and set it down beside Hinata. He sat down and gave her some ramen after discreetly obtaining her consent to do so. Both of them found the entire situation awkward, and Hinata was relieved when she was done. Nevertheless, Hinata enjoyed the performance and could see that the clone was having fun despite the awkwardness. Fun, that is, in the sense that it wasn't terrible. After a courteous farewell, the clone puffed out of existence, and Hinata patiently waited for Naruto to finish his final 2 bowls of ramen. Naruto said, glancing down at his ramen, "I'm sorry." Hinata smiled broadly and said, "It's okay, you were just being kind." Naruto looked up, and Hinata saw regret in his eyes as he said, "No, not that." Hinata felt herself hold her breath as she looked into his blue eyes and said, "I was trying to save you but you still got hurt." His eyes were so full of emotion that Hinata thought they looked like Minato's in her sans. He looked away, allowing her to gather her thoughts and register what he had said. Hinata caught Naruto's eyes as he glanced at her and said, "It's okay, Naruto. You at least tried. That's all I could ask for from a stranger." He appeared to be about to say something, but instead he burped loudly and for a long time. He remained quiet, wishing he could go back in time. Hinata was going to say something else as she smiled at him, but something happened that made her want to die. She let out a burp. She put her hand over her mouth and gazed at Naruto. Even though it wasn't as loud or prolonged as Naruto's, he could still hear it, and they looked at each other for a good minute. At last they both burst out laughing. Naruto was the first to laugh, and Hinata was not far behind. Before they caught their breath and Naruto finished his ramen, they laughed for a good 5 minutes. However, they remained in the restaurant and started conversing instead of leaving immediately. They discussed everything from their preferred weapons and fighting styles to their age and chakra affinity. Hinata had escaped Naruto's attempts to inquire about her origins without coming across as overtly strange or obvious. They ultimately made the decision to depart. but there was a catch. Hinata, clearly embarrassed, said, actually, I only had enough money for 10 ramen bowls. Naruto laughed. After searching his person and failing to locate his wallet, Naruto paled and said, "It's okay. I'll pay for." His eyes widened, and he muttered a curse as he rummaged through his memory to find where he had left his wallet. Naruto hung his head in response to Hinata's question, "What is it?" He pouted as he looked up, and Hinata couldn't help but laugh a little. "When I sent those flaming tornadoes at the man, I also burned my backpack. The backpack that my wallet was in." The fact that he had a cute pout was more amusing than the fact that he had burned his wallet. Hinata paused her laughter long enough to notice a playful sparkle in his blue eyes. "What is it?" Naruto asked, his sly eyes accompanied by a corresponding smile. "I've got an idea." As Kurotsuchi watched Naruto whisper something into Hinata's ear from behind a bush, she scowled at the back of Hinata's head. She was gritting her teeth when Hinata gave her a slight smile and shook her head. Then Naruto stepped back slightly to reveal his cute puppy eyes to her. Hinata turned her head away, and it took Naruto's second whisper for her to laugh and reluctantly nod. Naruto got up at that point and went to the restroom. After surveying the area before entering, he created 3 shadow clones while a cloud of smoke engulfed the Narutos. At this, Kurotsuchi arched an eyebrow. One Naruto went into the men's restroom as it cleared, and the other 3 went into the women's. This startled Kurotsuchi, who wondered what was that pervert up to? With a wink and a smile, the Naruto who had entered the men's room eventually emerged and took a seat again in front of Hinata. Hinata got up this time and went to the women's room. Kurotsuchi growled, more enraged than ever, "That perv. What does he think he's doing? Look, she's going to the bathroom too." When she saw that the 3 Narutos who had gone to the women's room were not returning, she thought, "What the hell are those perverts doing?" Kurotsuchi muttered to herself, "Where the hell did those other Narutos go?" Kurotsuchi jumped, took a kunai from her pouch, and turned to see 2 inquisitive looking Narutos. "What are you talking about? I only see one Naruto and the cute girl." She let go of her kunai and gave the 2 blondes a fierce look. His counterpart glared at the second clone as he made fun of him, saying, "I think she's talking about us, stupid." Kurotsuchi watched with mild amusement, "You're me, baka." But when the topic turned to the original's dinner date with Hinata, the little laughter she had was quickly snatched away. The word, date, caused Kurotsuchi's left eye to twitch. When Kurotsuchi exclaimed, "It's not a date, it's a not date," the 2 clones recoiled. They both stammered at the same time, "Oh. Okay." With a sigh, Kurotsuchi leveled each clone and fixed them with a chilly gaze. One clone questioned, "What?" The 2 clones exchanged glances before grinning sheepishly at Kurotsuchi and asking, "Why are you 2 here? What?" The first clone said, "We have an issue," and the second clone added, "We need your help." The clones took another look at the emphasis she placed on Hinata and said, "Tisk, why would I help you and her?" The twin blondes gave her a cute pout and Kurotsuchi couldn't find the strength to refuse them as she gazed at them. "Because you love us?" she asked. Consequently, she turned and answered. No, fortunately, she turned in time because she nearly said, "Yes." Shook her head, Kurotsuchi said, "Come on, we'll pay you back." Just as the clone was about to continue, his accomplice placed a hand on his shoulder. The first clone shrugged his shoulders in response to his nod. "We'll owe you one." Kurotsuchi was intrigued by this statement. "I'm listening." Before being pushed back by the other clone, the second clone said, "Anything you can think of and we'll do it. Within reason, of course." Kurotsuchi sighed after giving the 2 a passive gaze. Before Kurotsuchi gave the clone on the left a sucker punch to the nose, the 2 clones grinned and said, "Fine." With a wince, he collapsed onto his back and inhaled smoke. After glancing at the spot where his clone brother had fallen, the surviving clone turned to face Kurotsuchi. Before heading to the restaurant, she remarked, "That's for sneaking up on me." Before he vanished too, the clone simply gazed at Kurotsuchi's back. When his clone's memories returned, Naruto grinned and turned to face Hinata. They exchanged winks. Hinata didn't like that, but she didn't say it out loud. She was outside, just like I thought. No matter how eerie it sounded to Hinata, whatever Kurotsuchi was doing outside was her business. Kurotsuchi entered the restaurant a few seconds later and proceeded straight to their table. She said, "What do you want?" and Naruto gave an awkward laugh. Kurotsuchi raised an eyebrow and said, "We don't have money to pay for the meal." Kurotsuchi sighed and rolled her eyes before pulling out her money and slamming it onto the table. "So we'd be grateful if you helped." Being spied. The not date was noted. Baka. Anticipating a loud bang from Naruto as he struck the table, Kurotsuchi slammed her fist down on his head. Naturally, this would have occurred in the life of any regular kunoichi, or anyone for that matter. Regretfully, Normal doesn't really describe this kunoichi's life because she is aware of the erratic storm that is adolescence. Her life has clearly been too easy for fate. Kurotsuchi stared in disbelief as Naruto puffed into smoke, while Hinata burst out laughing. After gathering her thoughts, Kurotsuchi glared at Hinata, but she too vanished in a cloud of smoke. She gazed incredulously at the table before her mind devoid of all ideas save for one epiphany. They left her behind. She started grinding her teeth and balled up her fist. She should have considered the fourth Naruto, but she didn't know how it had escaped her. Scrambling out of the restaurant, she set out to find Hinata and Naruto. As they strolled down the street, Hinata and Naruto both laughed and kept looking back to see if anyone was pursuing them. Naruto's expression was blank for a moment before breaking into a tiny smile and then a loud laugh. Between chuckles, Naruto remarked, "It worked, she fell for it." Hinata kept laughing. Though Hinata was reluctant to acknowledge it, he said, "I still feel bad, though. She was nice enough to pay." Naruto shook his head. When Naruto saw Hinata genuinely consider it, he laughed and said, "If you want we could go back and apologize." "Are you kidding? She'd kill us before we could even say one word." Still, as Hinata opened her mouth to speak, Naruto covered it with his hand and said, "Come on, Hinata, it's okay." When Naruto ran out of ideas, he trailed off, "Okay, it looks like you're not going to let this go, so how about this?" With an eyebrow raised, Hinata said, "If you drop this, we'll be even." She said, "HMPHNHU Mahin." Although Naruto didn't fully comprehend her words, they sounded like, "What do you mean?" After a while, Hinata nodded and hummed to herself, "You forget what just happened and we'll be even. An eye for an eye, I guess." Naruto took his hand away. "Okay." She said, "Okay." Naruto grinned. "Awesome." They carried on talking about anything that came up as they wandered aimlessly. Naruto then made the brave decision. Hinata blinked and a fierce blush that surpassed all of her past blushes came on when she said, "I like your eyes." She wasn't used to receiving compliments like this. With the exception of her eyes, everyone would remark on her hair, body, clothes, and everything else. Hinata was aware that her friend's previous encounter wasn't as genuine as it could have been. She stammered, "Why? You do?" And Naruto nodded his head. After that, he tipped his head back and looked up at the night sky. With a frown, he hummed to himself, "They're unique. Never really seen anything like that before." Well, Hinata started to perspire, sensing that he was aware of the Hyuga's distinctive eyes. He shrugged and smiled again, saying, "They look familiar, but I don't think I've ever seen them in person." Hinata reddened once more and said, "Even if I've seen something like them, they're still pretty." Without hesitation, Naruto nodded his head and said, They are." Then he turned red. Evidently unprepared for that, Hinata gulped and said, "You are too." "Why? You think so?" She was having trouble listening because her brain was hammering so hard against her skull. Naruto glanced at her out of the corner of his eye before turning his attention back to the sky. His voice was not as loud as it could be, but he replied, "I do." Hinata was at a loss for words and said, Oh. She wanted to give the compliment back, but she was at a loss for ideas. It was still attempting to make sense of the Yondaimi's son's flirtation with her. Yes, quite bluntly, but flirting all the same. She might be able to persuade him that he is the Yondaimi's missing son and that he is actually from Konoha rather than Iwa if she doesn't screw this up. How difficult could that be? She blinked and then turned to face Naruto when he waved his right hand in front of her, asking, "Hinata-chan?" Earth to Hinata-chan. Hinata blushed and kept staring blankly at Naruto. "You okay?" "You called me, Hinata-chan." Naruto blushed and blinked this time. He turned his head away. Hinata grinned and chuckled. "Did I? I didn't notice." She said, "It's okay. I actually like it." She left, hoping Naruto would awaken from his illusion and follow her. When he did, he smiled and moved closer to her. So, hinted Hinata. "Where are you from?" Hinata asked, pretending to be thoughtful, but on the inside, she was panicking. "And don't try to change the subject." She gave him a disbelieving look, and Naruto laughed. "You're not as sly as you think." She said, "I see," and carried on walking in silence. Hinata bit her lower lip and glanced at her feet, asking, "So? Come on, why won't?" Then Hinata abruptly interrupted, "Can I ask you a question?" "Huh? Sure." Naruto grinned. Knowing the answer, "Why do you want to know so badly?" "Because when we go back to Iwa, "We're going to send a message to your home village and then we'll escort you back," replied Naruto. Although Hinata saw that the final sentence was delivered with less vigor, she chose not to mention it. "So, where are you from?" Hinata was becoming desperate as she was at the end of her rope. Her mind could only conjure images from the romantic films she and her mother had seen in the past. Thus, as a hidden leaf kunoichi, Hinata did what she was best at, being a kunoichi. Simply put, not in her typical manner. She asked, unexpectedly, "Do you like me?" to Naruto's surprise. "Huh?" she asked again. "Do you like me?" Hinata took a few steps forward before stopping, but Naruto halted his movement to gaze at her. I mean you. Yes or no?" she asked, avoiding eye contact to avoid undermining her self-confidence. Naruto simply stared at the back of her head while his mind mulled over this query. With a flush and a sheepish pat on the back of his head, Naruto remarked, "Well, I've never met anyone like you. And you were pretty," he went on, but paused to come up with an idea. "And you're funny and smart, and you seem to get me." Boldly, Hinata declared, "I like you." Her expression was passive, and her eyes were closed. Her heart seemed to want to leap out of her chest and simply flee. She had no idea what had been affecting her over the past few days, but she knew it would be fatal. At the very least, it would land her in hot water. "Why? You do?" Hinata asked him when she finally turned to face him and noticed that he was blushing and completely shocked. He appeared to be begging for the truth with his blue eyes. He wanted to hear the truth, not what he wanted to hear. Hinata could feel her hold on consciousness beginning to loosen, and she thought she might drown in his stunning azure pools. If Naruto hadn't intervened, she would have fallen after taking a step back. He grabbed her left hand with his right hand and used his left arm to support her back. "Are you okay?" Naruto grinned as Hinata gave a stupid nod. He stepped back shyly and straightened her. She said, "I'm sorry, W. What were we talking about?" as Naruto's whiskered cheeks turned red again. Hinata blushed too, but it was much darker than his. Well, you said you like me." "Well, I do." Hinata couldn't help but be drawn to Naruto for some reason. Damn it. The man was the most charismatic person she had ever met. He possessed his father's charm. Naruto admitted, "I like you, too." Hinata felt a sense of regret for the exchange. She genuinely liked him, she wasn't lying. He had a way of making her laugh and always had a smile on his face. Although he was open-minded and didn't mind expressing his opinions, he occasionally knew when to keep them to himself. He was a gentleman, intelligent, witty, and mischievous. She felt terrible about bringing it up in a conversation to avoid another trait, even though there were more. She thought she was playing with his emotions. Perhaps I should just tell him my origins. I shouldn't manipulate his feelings the way I do. But am I? I didn't lie, really. I really like him, but, Hinata said, biting her lower lip. If he found out that I'm from Konoha, would he still like me? I doubt it, considering that he's from Iwa. Hinata looked down, depressed by this thought. I ought to inform him. It doesn't matter if he likes me later, he is entitled to know. Hinata began, Naruto, but was cut off when a set of lips planted themselves on top of hers. As she released her body from the grip of her mind, her eyes widened and then relaxed. She returned his kiss. Hinata and Naruto could not have cared less about the sloppy nature of it. For them, it was their first kiss, and they enjoyed the sensation. Hinata's eyes were half closed, glassy, and her mouth was slightly open when they finally parted. Naruto was looking at Hinata with a silly smile on his face. Hinata grinned absently as he said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself." He wrapped his arms around her waist as she gave him a hug. He laughed as she nestled against his chest. Hinata abruptly awoke from her reverie and asked, "So, what were you going to say?" You were saying something?" Hinata asked, recalling her next move prior to the divine kiss. After a moment of hesitation, she replied, "Oh, it's nothing." When she was less at ease, she could wait to tell him that she was from Konoha. With a feeling of calm in his heart, Naruto simply dismissed it and kept holding her. After a while, he said, "We should probably go. It's getting late." Reluctantly, Hinata nodded, and they made their way to the hotel. Hinata was hesitant to take his hand, but Naruto grabbed hers and held it in his, so she didn't have to worry. After exchanging warm smiles, Hinata rested her head on his right shoulder. Depressed that Naruto had managed to give her the slip, Kurotsuchi sagged up to her hotel room. Standing before her room, she merely gazed at it sorrowfully, wishing it would open so she wouldn't have to do it herself. With a sigh, she was ready to use her card to open it when she noticed Deidara approaching her from down the hallway. He was more concerned with getting ahead without falling flat on his face than he was with actually walking. She said, "Deidara. Sensei. What are you doing out?" and Deidara smiled at her intoxicatedly. Kurotsuchi would never have guessed that he was intoxicated if it weren't for his gait, his posture, and the glassy look in his eyes. Kurotsuchi. I'm so glad I found you. You have no idea how many floors I've tried before I found this one. Kurotsuchi had never encountered a drunk who didn't slur, so it seemed strange that he didn't even do that. Kurotsuchi asked, "Are you okay?" And Deidara gave a nod. He replied casually, "Fine and dandy." She said, "Why are you drunk off your ass?" And Deidara chuckled. Sweating, Kurotsuchi said, "I'm not drunk, I'm just buzzed." She muttered, "Like that's any better." "Where's Naruto?" Deidara inquired, scanning the corridor. She complained, "Still out." Laughing, Deidara leaned against the wall and slid down slowly. Kurotsuchi looked at her sensei as if he were insane and asked, "With the Konoha chick?" Deidara waved his hand as if he were swatting a fly and asked, "Can you repeat that?" He drawled, then blinked owlishly before laughing once more. "Peef. It's ironic, don't you tink?" He said. I said, "Tink, oops." Deidara. "Sensei, focus. What did you say?" I said, "Tink." "No, before that." As her patience began to waver, Kurotsuchi asked, "That it's ironic?" "Okay. What's ironic?" Deidara laughed. "Naruto's out there, getting treated to ramen by that girl," he responded. She hoped she hadn't misheard him when she asked, "Why's that ironic? She could use this to make Naruto despise Hinata for eternity if she didn't." He gave her a stupid look and taunted, "Are you deaf?" I said, "Because she's from Konoha." Kurotsuchi said, "Man, you're a mean drunk." Deidara covered his lips with his right index finger. Kurotsuchi gave an evil smile in response to the words, "Shush. Don't tell anyone, especially Naruto." As Kurotsuchi started to plan against Hinata, she opened the door to her room and closed it behind her. "Oh, we'll see." Deidara scratched the back of his head and looked around outside her room. He got up and started to look around the hallways, hoping to locate his room. "What's going on?" he asked. Minato turned the corner and stalked up the stairs to the apartment building's second floor. After passing 2 doors, he came to a stop in front of the third. He reached up to knock, but the sounds of struggle and then quiet interrupted him. However, it didn't last long because Minato adopted a serious expression as the sound of glass breaking could be heard. His student was among the muffled voices that started to speak. The other sounded familiar, but he couldn't remember the face or the name. At that moment, Minato saw that the frame of the door was slanted inward, as though someone had already pushed their way into the space. Minato rushed into the door, expecting to see Kakashi fighting an intruder or something, as more sounds of struggle followed. The sight before him caused him to perspire. Sitting on the back of one Kakashi Hitaki, his other pupil, Obito Uchiha, grinned a contented but inebriated grin. Naturally, Kakashi was having difficulties, but whatever was circulating through his bloodstream was having a negative impact on his strength, agility, and intelligence. Or perhaps he simply didn't make a lot of effort, in any case. "What the hell?" hung in the air as his 2 students gazed at him, initially blankly, before Obito flashed a cheeky smile and Kakashi's difficulties multiplied tenfold. At last, he discovered leverage in Obito's left leg. In order to propel Obito forward and cause him to collapse on his face, he tugged on it and raised his lower back. Kakashi got up and sloppily saluted his surrogate father and sensei. Obito found the strength to laugh and smile carelessly despite the throbbing pain in his face. Obito exclaimed, "You sensei," and Kakashi sighed, his mask concealing the flushed flush that marred his cheeks. Minato remained largely silent during the entire ordeal. After stepping inside, he shut the door. He kept looking from Obito to Kakashi, absorbing every detail. Despite his passive demeanor, Minato was confused and joyful on the inside. At last, a smile appeared on his lips and he gave Obito a hug. Obito said, "Obito, it's been so long," and he was about 2 inches taller than Minato, with hair that had not changed in years. Actually, aside from a few select pieces of apparel and the color palette, nothing changed. He made it red and black instead of blue and orange. He wore a scarf that was blood red as well. No matter where he went, that scarf would always be placed around his neck. Although Minato and Kakashi were both aware of the reason, it was his own. He added more sarcasm by clearing his throat. "It's good to see you, too, sensei. Oh, and if I haven't thanked you for sending me off to a year-long mission to be Konoha's temporary ambassador for Kiri, let me do that now," he said. "Thanks." Minato shot back before catching a clear glimpse of Obito, saying, "It was a pleasure." Then he recalled his purpose for visiting Kakashi's apartment. "I need you," he said, turning to face the slothful scarecrow. "I was counting on your mission to end around this time." Both sets of eyes widened when he said, "And you to help me find my goddaughter." Before Obito could respond, Kakashi asked, "How long ago was this?" They both nodded intelligently when he said, "Not long ago. A little over 3 days ago." As he cracked his knuckles, Obito questioned, "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's get this started." Obito's eagerness caused Minato to shake his head. "Meet me at the front gates in less than half an hour. That should be enough time for the both of you to get your things and to get something to eat before we leave." The two pupils chanted, "Hi." Minato started to walk away, but he stopped and turned back to his students. The question appeared hesitant to be asked, but when it was, Obito laughed sheepishly and Kakashi moaned into his palm. I want to know what was going on before I arrived." They both shook their heads at the same time. With a sigh, Minato turned to go. "Okay, just checking." After what seemed like an eternity, Minato discovered that 3/4 of his team was present. After waiting for a few minutes, Obito started to get restless. "Why haven't we left yet?" He trailed off, "We still need to wait for one more," as he noticed a silhouette approaching them. The three shinobi were unable to identify the individual approaching them until he was within 10 feet of them due to the fog that hung over Konoha. Minato was taken aback when the silhouette appeared beneath the street lamp. "Hokage Sama," said Heishi, bowing his head as respectfully as he could. Heishi stood up, his eyes glowing with laughter. "Is something the matter, Hokage Sama?" "I was sort of expecting a Hyuga and..." Minato angrily shook his head, asking, "Am I not a Hyuga?" "It's not that, but when I sent that message, I assumed you'd be too busy to go on the search, so you'd send a branch member to accompany me." Hieshi's eyebrow went up. "The same can be said for you, Hokage Sama. Running this village is a heavy burden to carry. I am quite surprised you have found the time to do this mission at all." Remaining composed, Minato replied, "I found a temporary substitute." Heishi answered, "As did I." Minato gave a small smile. Kakashi and Obito silently observed the exchange, and to their surprise, Kakashi broke it up. Minato and Heishi nodded, turned to face the gates, and ran down the dirt road, saying, "Come on. We should probably start this search before any remaining leads become any colder." In mid-run, Heishi thought, his features hardening to the point of stone. "Please hold on, Hinata. I'll come get you. I also won't lose you." "No way. It's true." Daichi wiped the last of the sleep from his eyes and remarked, "Naruto's not going to like this." The dream wasn't too horrible, and he was in the middle of the best sleep he had had in a long time. Kurotsuchi was always bad news in one way or another, so he detested seeing her in his room now. But when she mentioned Hinata and Konoha in her opening statement, his thoughts of sleep vanished. She smirked as she squealed, "I know, isn't it great?" But Daichi had a different opinion. She was reminded by Daichi that, "Naruto seems really fond of this girl." He shook his head, saying, "He might get all depressing if he finds out." Kurotsuchi simply scoffed, saying, "Emo Naruto is not a good thing." Daichi looked at her and said, "He'll be fine, he's got me," and she started to perspire. You too, I guess." Daichi collapsed on his bed and stared at the ceiling, saying, "That's not what I meant." Glaring at the casual brown-haired boy, she flushed and asked, "Why do you go after him so feverishly?" She heard him sigh, but he didn't move. What do you mean?" she asked. Kurotsuchi's face glowed like the sky after fireworks, half in embarrassment and half in rage as she said, "It's obvious to everyone but the brainless killing machine that you have a crush on him. The only problem is, you keep going after him even though he's unconsciously rejected you." She screamed, "No he hasn't," and Daichi winced. He sat up and fixed Kurotsuchi with his gray-pink, focused gaze. As Kurotsuchi said, "I'm going to say this with as much respect and sympathy as I can." He saw his eyes shift from concern to an unreadable emotion and then back to sympathy. "Naruto doesn't like you the same way you like him." Daichi couldn't help but say it, even though it sounded harsh and biting. The mere act of telling her this evoked memories and feelings he wished he could put behind him forever. But this was something she needed to hear. Instead of dismissing the facts like a child in denial, she needed to wake up and face them. Daichi felt a vein about to burst. "What makes you say that?" he asked. He inhaled deeply and exhaled through his nose. In response, he shook his head and pushed her out of his room gently. "What the hell are you doing?" At this point, Kurotsuchi was outside his room and turned to face her teammate, who had sad, drooping eyes. "I'm done. Good night." Silence fell as the door slammed in her face and she said, "See y'all in the morning." Kurotsuchi simply continued to gaze at the door before gritting her teeth and turning to leave. Daichi simply slid down until he touched the floor with his back against the door. Damn it, Kurotsuchi, he said, covering his pounding heart with his hand. He added flatly, now I won't be able to get her off my mind for a week. Perfect, before he sighed and immediately headed to bed. Let's start the sleep game of cat and mouse. With a mock, passive expression, Hinata joked, I still think I can beat you in a spar. With a laugh, Naruto placed his hands behind his head. They had originally intended to sleep in their separate rooms, but they just so happened to run into a purported psychic. Naruto thought the woman was crazy, and he had no trouble telling Hinata this little fact, who merely laughed. The imposter babbled on about a furball and a blue cat and a slug fighting. They then discovered a small park and a small clearing with a water fountain. Naruto's and Hinata's senior played on the swings, which are typically only used by young children. They were about 2 years old. The girl laughed as the boy, who was a little taller than Naruto, pushed her. The two chose to sit on the fountain's edges, where their conversation began, rather than immediately heading for the vacant seat next to the contented couple. I don't know. One view of my awesome skills and you'll be thinking twice before asking for a spar. Naruto said with pride. With a contemplative look on her face, Hinata nodded firmly. She batted her eyelashes and leaned forward, saying, maybe you're right, I wouldn't stand a chance against a big, strong man like you. As Hinata gave him a phony worried and dejected expression, Naruto blinked and stepped back. Her chin nearly touched his, but he slid away, his face flushed as red as blood, and said, please save me. But Hinata was right behind him. As she trailed after him, her face took on a sly look. With his libido pushing him in the other direction, Naruto swallowed and kept moving back, slowly edging away from Hinata. I'm just a helpless damsel in distress. Won't you help me? He asked. He has never really been in agreement with his libido. Hinata pouted and covered her lip with her right index finger in a sensual manner. Naruto lost it when he heard the quiet, lulling voice ask, W. What's wrong? In actuality, once again, he plunged into the frigid water. He sprang out of the water in less than a second, trembling and screaming as he went. He noticed Hinata with her shoulders trembling and her back to him. He approached her and said, Hinata, are you? But was cut off when she turned and giggled while wearing a radiant smile. After a brief moment of strange staring, Naruto scowled. After gathering her thoughts, Hinata took note of his face. I'm sorry. She said she was sorry, then she noticed that his eyes gleamed with what she now knew to be mischief. He smiled a bit too sweetly, and she stepped back, a tiny bit of fear creeping in. Naruto stepped forward as Hinata hesitantly nodded. You like to laugh, I see. Naruto jumped into action, putting his fingers on Hinata's sides and beginning to tickle her, saying, it just so happens, I love to make people laugh. Her reaction was immediate. She giggled in surprise and then burst out laughing. She exclaimed with delight, no, stop, please. But Naruto just laughed with her and carried on with his tickle attack. She was laughing when she stumbled and fell back. Before she could fall, Naruto grabbed her. After her outburst of laughter subsided, Hinata became aware of her proximity to Naruto. She could feel his powerful hands holding her close as her body was pressed against his. For a long time, they gazed into each other's eyes. Naruto compared it to gazing into two lavender moons' reflections in two white pools. Beautiful and one of a kind. Hinata saw herself gazing into a god's icy blue eyes. Faintly aware that they were drawing nearer, the two kept looking into each other's eyes. Naruto and Hinata blinked when his name was called, and when they looked up, they saw Kurotsuchi sprinting in their direction. With a groan, Naruto used his right hand to wipe his face. Hinata merely gave the girl a suspicious look, sensing that whatever Kurotsuchi desired would not be good for her. A bit too sweetly, Kurotsuchi gave Hinata a smile. She said, hello Hinata, before either of them could respond, and Kurotsuchi grabbed Hinata and pulled her away from Naruto. She said quickly, don't worry, just girl talk. Kurotsuchi's eyes darkened with trouble, but her smile persisted until they were far enough away for Naruto to not overhear their conversation. Hinata arched an eyebrow and said, you almost got away with it, you didn't think I knew where you're really from? Kurotsuchi was pleased to see Hinata's look of surprise. Hinata stammered, and Kurotsuchi's grin grew as she felt her grip on her tighten. Why? You're bluffing. Oh, am I? Maybe you're right, stated Kurotsuchi with a shrug. Hinata saw the confidence in her eyes and knew she wasn't bluffing when she asked, but are you willing to take that chance? Fear quickly appeared in Hinata's eyes, and Kurotsuchi realized that she now had Hinata securely in her palm. Thought so. Kurotsuchi turned to look at Naruto. Though the question seemed sincere enough, Kurotsuchi left before Hinata could respond, asking, you think he'd still like you if he knew? Hinata's hand managed to grab her elbow and stop her. Wait. What? Kurotsuchi inquired, her voice tinged with annoyance. Don't tell him, please, Hinata pleaded, trying to sound composed. Hinata seemed to feel hurt when she said, I'll tell him. Kurotsuchi was a little pleased by this, but not sufficiently. She tore her elbow out of Hinata's hand and strode over to Naruto, saying, You had your chance to tell him. Hinata closed her eyes and bit her lip. Let's make a deal, Kurotsuchi said, halting her progress. Hinata stopped and observed Kurotsuchi's body language intently. You seem really fond of him. And you seem to know him pretty well, she said. Hinata grinned. She paid attention to her. But how well do you know him? Kurotsuchi's pink eyes were filled with doubt as she turned to face Hinata. You met him about 3 days ago, she said slowly, her words brimming with venom. I've known him since we were kids. What could you know that I don't? When Naruto was a small child, he had a small toy that made his worst fears disappear. Do you know its name? Seemed like an unexpected question, and after seeing Kurotsuchi's shocked expression, Hinata couldn't help but smile. I see, you didn't even know it existed. How do I know you're not lying? Hinata could see opportunities and openings now that the roles had been reversed. If Kurotsuchi hadn't already been a crazy fangirl, Hinata would have felt worse about this, but her conscience was still troubled by guilt. With a swift reply, Hinata asked, Can you risk it? Kurotsuchi attempted to look for dishonesty in Hinata's eyes, but all that was visible was confidence. Hinata moved calmly but cautiously as she brushed a stray hair behind her ear. Hinata scowled at Kurotsuchi's final statement, Fine. I won't tell Naruto about you and you give me the information. However, you need to tell him yourself. But, Kurotsuchi cut in, you know it's the right thing to do. Hinata nodded her head and her mouth hung open before closing. Now, spill it. Standing a few feet away, a man with dark eyes glared at the blonde bundle of hair from his perch atop a tree. His target stayed off to the side with an unidentified ninja, talking in a low voice that was too faint for him to hear. At the blonde who was staring at his target, his eyes narrowed. As his rage bubbled up inside him, the man repeatedly clenched his fist open and closed. His throat was vibrating with a growl. Without hesitation, the man jumped and landed behind the person who had just spoken from behind him. Oh, you're a feisty one, he said. He pulled out a kunai and moved it to point at the figure's neck as he wrapped the figure in a headlock with his left arm. The figure gave a passionate purr. Very feisty. When the figure revealed itself to be a woman with blue hair, the man arched an eyebrow. As she cradled the man's arm, she moaned softly, almost orgasmically. I love him feisty. In order to put his lips close to the woman's left ear, the man bent his head. What the hell do you want? The woman mewed, Ooh, stop it, you tease, as her body shivered. The blue-haired woman laughed at the remark, TCH, pervert. He felt one of her delicate hands encircle the kunai. Holding hand. She seemed to beat him to it as she gradually applied pressure, just as he was about to threaten her. The man abruptly shoved the woman forward in mid-jump so he could land on a branch away from her. Make me bleed. NYU, let the fresh scent of blood fill me, he said. She turned to look at the man and groaned at this. The distance he placed between them made her pout. You're no fun. The woman became animated and burst out laughing when she was asked, Who the hell are you? Ignoring the man's question, she remarked, That boy seems to be giving you a hard time, the man growled. What's it to you? Before throwing something at the man, the woman gave him a wink. Without flinching, he caught it and examined it. The man had a small stone in his palm that resembled a drill and was shaped like a spiraling cone. On the flat end of the cone, a picture that looked like a cat was painted in neon green. A line spun down toward the stone's tip, the same color as the cat. The man regarded the hematophiliac with suspicion and amazement. What is this? A talisman, she purred, and then she quickly gave the man a hug. Something sharp touched the man's left earlobe, causing him to tense. If you want to beat the blonde, you'll need this. Another purr sent a shiver down the man's spine. I can beat the brat without it. Because the man was too preoccupied with the woman's breath on his ear, the question lingered unanswered. But can you do it and take the girl before reinforcements arrive? Her small, delicate hand closed on the talisman as he felt it. Inject the talisman into your chest, when the time comes. The woman bit down on the man's earlobe, piercing the skin and extracting blood as the man flinched. Her body trembled with ecstasy as she licked it. The blue-haired woman drew back to the man and asked, How'd I know this won't kill me? You don't, she said as she fell backward, away from the branch, and toward the ground. The man didn't hear the woman hit the floor, and he didn't see her when he looked down. She simply vanished, as though she had only existed in his head. He gave a headshake. Crazy bitch. Whatever he thought of this woman, he had to acknowledge that she was giving him power, and he wasn't the type to turn down authority. He fingered the talisman and opened his palm. He sensed that power was at his fingertips. The man could tell the talisman had more power than 10 jonin simply by holding it in his hand, and the power felt good. More than 6 cages, perhaps. After putting the talisman in his pocket, he observed his target and prey converse for a few minutes before they split up. As they drifted away, he watched the two and realized that they were both currently easy targets. Both could stop being a pain in his side with a single motion. Perhaps he had lost his mind due to the influence of the talisman. In any case, he grinned as he saw them vanish from view. He sat there for a long time, preparing himself for action while he stared at nothing. Before making his move, he had given his target a minute or so's head start. After all, if he didn't give his prey an advantage, what kind of predator would he be? In what context would a quick game of cat and mouse be enjoyable? Naruto observed the two girls conversing with each other. Even with the distance between them, he could easily hear what they were saying. However, he chose to respect their privacy and contented himself with merely observing their body language. He had to struggle to stop himself from listening in when he noticed Hinata's body tensed and Kurotsuchi's becoming relaxed. Naruto realized that the only way he could avoid the temptation when the two girls switched roles was to find another way to divert his attention. After a good minute or two of staring at his shoes, he let out a sigh. He turned toward the fountain that reflected the lovely, if less elegant, image of the moon. He looked up, his cerulean eyes meeting golden feline eyes. He heard a purr and stepped back, realizing that he was looking directly at Neko. Her tongue hung over her fangs, which were exposed by her smile. Naruto's right hand sprang up to seize her as his left fist clenched, but she vanished in an instant. Confusion and amusement at his own foolishness, Naruto blinked to see if she would return as soon as she had left. Naruto rubbed his head and shook when she didn't. He took a seat on the fountain's edge, being cautious not to fall in again. He briefly closed his eyes, and then he saw Hinata standing in front of him with a smile on her face. When Naruto saw that Hinata appeared more reserved, his smile wavered. Be cautious, sad. The question was posed before Naruto had a chance to consider it. What's wrong? What did Kurotsuchi do this time? Hinata chuckled a little and then shook her head. Nothing. Naruto was tempted to play with her fragile hands and hold them in his while also letting her know that he was there for her. But he restrained himself and contented himself to look at her while he waited for her to continue talking. When Hinata saw that he was staring, she tried pathetically to smile broadly. But on the inside, Hinata knew that any joy she had had was short-lived because she knew that things would become chaotic when she eventually revealed to Naruto that she was from Konoha. On second thought, everything would go to hell very quickly because he is the child of Kushina Uzumaki. Hinata swallowed. Hinata steeled herself and asked, "Okay, Hinata-chan, what's bothering you?" She was aware that she couldn't avoid it. He had to know, she had to tell him. That's what she owed him, at least. She gazed into Naruto's eyes and then let her mouth speak for itself. She kept rambling on, beginning sentences but never finishing them, then beginning a new one and never finishing it. Well, actually she said. In a matter of seconds, Naruto became perplexed and gently seized her shoulders. Naruto's actions silenced Hinata and caused her to stop spluttering. Instructing, take deep breaths and calm down. Hinata gave him a nod and did as he said. She finally looked at Naruto after her fear subsided a bit. Naruto was caught off guard by the first coherent sentence. I'm afraid. Fearful? There was nothing to fear. Of what? Naruto couldn't help but chuckle when Hinata said, I need to tell you something, and I'm afraid you'll hate me for it. The hair on the back of his head stood on end all of a sudden. It was strange because that didn't happen very often, but he ignored it. He reassured her, and Hinata nodded, albeit hesitantly. Oh come on, Hinata-chan. I can be a bit of a hot head sometimes, but I'm not judgmental. Go on, tell me. Saying, Naruto.kun, Hinata hesitated. Do you trust me? Naruto nodded despite raising an eyebrow. With a sigh, she looked him in the eyes and said, Good. I just wanted to make sure. The reason I didn't tell you of my origin is because I know how much you hate Konoha. What does that? Naruto looked at Hinata incredulously as something clicked in his head. At last, as though he had seen her for the first time, Naruto was able to introduce Hinata to the Hyuga clan. Those eyes were the defining feature of the Hyuga clan. Hinata's was slightly more lavender than white, but that's the sole difference. He was such a fool. How was he going to forget everything he had discovered about Konoha? How to determine whether a Konoha nin was wearing a forehead protector or not? No matter how skilled someone was, that last one was quite difficult to complete. Even though Hinata was standing in front of him, Trembling from head to toe, Naruto was too preoccupied scolding himself for being such a fool, such an idiot, to be taken in so easily. She was afraid of the angry expression in his eyes because she thought it was aimed at her. Somehow, she was certain that she would lose him if she did nothing. Hinata knew herself well enough to realize that she had at least grown fond of this young man. Thus, Hinata took action out of sheer desperation. Her fear overcame her as she jumped at Naruto, who was sitting on the edge of the fountain, put her arms around his neck, and started crying into his shoulder. Naruto cursed his chivalrous nature again, but he knew he couldn't ignore a woman in tears for very long. In this instance, he made an effort, but strangely, he didn't want to push Hinata away despite her disclosure. He struggled with himself for a moment more, then slowly put his arms around her in an attempt to console her. He deliberately ignored his personal worries, choosing to address them after his chivalry was satiated. To put it another way, after Hinata had calmed down, he would worry about himself. He moaned to himself, but he was aware that he had always prioritized other people over himself. Naruto kept her in his arms, pushing the pleasure of doing so to the back of his mind. At last, her tears transformed into adorable sniffles. At least in Naruto's opinion. He pushed her back slowly so he could look into her face. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her eyes were pink from crying. Naruto felt guilty and wished he had fled, or at the very least, that his chivalrous ways had never been. With a hand beneath Hinata's chin, Naruto raised her head and looked directly into her eyes. Most, if not all, of Naruto's rage vanished as she said, I'm sorry. Her tone was melancholy and soft. She trailed off, her voice failing her as a few silent tears escaped her eyes. I know I should have told you earlier but, she said. When Naruto closed the distance between them and gave her a firm embrace, her eyes widened. She didn't understand. He should be furious, right? If anything, she thought he would push her away and turn away without turning around. With her fists balled up, Hinata placed her hands on his back and clutched his shirt, fighting back fresh tears. For a long time, they stayed that way. It seemed like forever to them, but neither of them grew older. Reluctantly, Naruto withdrew from the embrace and let out a sigh. Hinata waited patiently for him to speak, but his eyes stayed closed. His eyes opened slowly, azure-hued crystals that were fixed on her lavender moons. She could see the rage he harbored, the fire fueled by his determination. But the rage was being suppressed. He was suppressing his bottled-up anger with an emotion that made Hinata feel guilty. His rage was suppressed by betrayal. Hinata did everything she could to avoid crying once more. His words, "I need some time alone, Hinata," made Hinata shiver. In contrast to the Naruto who had saved her and the one who had taken her out on a date, he was extremely formal and submissive. But Hinata couldn't hold it against him. Hinata felt a little uneasy because of how composed he was speaking. If this was the case, he must have been extremely distressed because he frequently behaved very much like his mother. Kushina would vent with a little training, but she only spoke so calmly after being upset when it truly bothered her. In this case, perhaps Naruto would follow in his father's footsteps, when Minato was angry. Oh no, when his parents were angry, they both trained. Hinata stepped back and said, oh, okay, while Naruto and Hinata simply stared at one another. Several times, Naruto's mouth moved as though he was going to speak, but instead he shook his head and gestured to Hinata. Holding her hands together, Hinata covered her chest. After a brief moment of watching him go, she also parted ways with him. Hinata whispered, "Oh, Naruto. I wish your parents were here, they'd know what to do," after confirming that he was out of hearing range. Naruto froze, his body tensing up. My parents? He pondered. What on earth was she trying to say? With everything else on his mind, he decided not to worry about that right now and continued to walk away, oblivious to the fact that a pair of black, predatory eyes was watching him from a nearby tree. A husky voice asked, "My parents?" As the words made the person's breath catch in their throat. The speaker combed through his blonde hair with his fingers. Disengaged and more drab than usual, Azure Pools gazed blankly at the ceiling. She couldn't possibly have known them. I don't even know them, he said. When Naruto parted ways with Hinata, he had returned to his hotel room. He couldn't find the will to care, and he didn't know where she went. Though it bothered him a little that the sun was shining on his eyes after slipping past the curtains he had drawn, he didn't really care about anything. He sighed as he turned on his side and said, "Why should I believe her? She's from Konoha. She could easily be lying to me." He scowled and turned back onto his back. "But, it doesn't feel like she's lying," he said. Naruto responded, "She's a ninja, she could be a good liar," and gave a casual nod. With a groan, he closed his eyes and clutched a handful of his hair. "I'm not getting anywhere with this. Stupid hormones. The old man warned me about this, but I had to brush it off as him going senile, he said with a sigh. He had to grin a little at this. He made it seem like the world was going to end. That a war was going to happen, he said. Guess the old fool was right. He blinked. He muttered, what if she isn't lying? After raising his left eyebrow, he sat up and surveyed the hotel room he was staying in. When he heard a slight knock on his door once more, he swung his legs across the bed and got out, making his way to the door. He was shocked to discover his sensei holding an ice pack over his head when he opened it. In addition, Deidara's bloodshot eyes startled Naruto. Naruto's voice was unusually low and raspy as he asked, Sensei? Nevertheless, Deidara crinkled his eyes and winced. He moaned, Shush, not so loud. He passed Naruto and took a seat on his bed. Once more causing his sensei to wince and groan loudly, Naruto shut the door and switched on the lights. Naruto leaned his back against the door and reprimanded, Damn it sensei, what has the old man said about drinking on a mission? You're a lightweight. It's dangerous for you to be near alcohol. As he tried to suppress his headache, Deidara answered, I know, it wasn't my fault. Naruto questioned, what the hell happened? In search of a satisfying meal before turning in for the night, Deidara entered a restaurant. Before going to bed, he always enjoyed having a snack. A beautiful, smooth voice said, Hello sir, how may I help you this fine evening? Taking in the young woman, Deidara turned to the voice. She was wearing her long black hair in a ponytail. Behind her glasses, her gray eyes glowed with passion. Her outfit consisted of a pink blouse, a pink skirt, and an apron stained with grease that was tied around her waist, as is customary for waitresses. An uncontrollable smile spread across Deidara's lips. He searched for a name tag but couldn't find one. Hello. Just get me some rice balls and tea, he said. He said, I'm sorry, what's your name? And the girl laughed. Suki, she replied, blushing and bowing. Deidara gestured back and then looked her in the eyes. Deidara felt a chill run down her spine as her gray eyes flashed with a primitive lust. Deidara was tense by that moment of lust, but he didn't show it on the outside. He wasn't sure what it was. Suki nodded before vanishing into the kitchen. Well, Suki, if you can get the rice balls and tea to me as soon as you can, that'd be great, Deidara said. She came back with his food a few minutes later. Grinning, she placed it in front of him. Deidara said, Thank you, and Suki gave a nod. Deidara was just taking a sip of his tea when she left. 3 things caught his attention in that initial swallow. The first was that the tea was far too cold to be tea. Second, it was sake rather than tea. Third, Suki's hips swayed, which caused his heart to work twice as hard and pump blood to a different area of his body. He started to smile drunkenly, and his eyes drooped. Deidara yelled, Suki. And she turned, her smile crooked. But he ignored it and motioned her to his side. This isn't tea, Suki said, gasping as her smile faltered. She reached for his cup, but Deidara stopped her. My apologies, I'll fix that up right away, she said. With a flush from drinking, he said, It's okay. I was just going to ask if you can bring me more. Suki blinked, then nodded and grinned as she prepared to bring him more. Deidara came to the conclusion, and that's what happened, while Naruto was massaging his temples and attempting to avoid hitting his sensei in the head. I woke up outside my room. Couldn't find my key. Naruto muttered to himself, lightweight, as he looked at the clock. 12:30? Naruto asked incredulously, Is it really 12:30? And Deidara gave a painful nod. Naruto shook his head and moaned. After a few minutes of silence, Deidara heard the sound of running water coming from the bathroom, where he had gone right. At the doorway, a voice said, Hey, where's Naruto? Deidara looked in the direction of the voice, but his eyes widened and he was unable to speak. I want to show him something. Deidara was forced to consider whether he was the only one who had consumed alcohol the previous evening. Each of the 4 ninjas' eyes glowed with the will of fire that only the devoted and independent members of the village hidden in the leaves possess, even though their faces were all as professionally passive as the next as the wind whistled past their ears. Particularly, one of those eyes was hazy with doubt, anger, and paternal anxiety. The domino effect included all of his feelings. His daughter's abduction sparked his concern, which in turn fueled his anger at the blasphemous act against Konoha as well as the Hyuga clan. Additionally, his anger had caused him to doubt whether they would ever see his daughter again. Heishi said, blinking as he looked at his longtime friend. Minato said firmly, We're going to find her. While it was helpful, it was not intended to reassure Heishi. Although it did inspire the team to maintain their optimism, it wasn't stated that way. They claimed that it stated the obvious. Heishi sensed the assurance in Minato's voice, as though it were well known. But it wasn't just what he said, it was also the look on his face. Heishi recognized that face. He had only ever seen that face in a select few people. And no matter what, that small group of individuals always completed the task. The patriarch of the Hyuga smiled. He glanced at his allies' faces and saw that they were beaming with the Hokage's confidence. Heishi was happy to have such friends. Heishi turned his attention back to himself and pressed the Kekkei Genkai. They were getting closer to what Team 8 had reported as their campsite. They were able to complete the journey in less than a day because of their expertise and abilities. He was aware that there was little to no chance of discovering any clues, but it never hurts to try, does it? After reaching their destination, the four of them surveyed their surroundings. The area appeared to be fairly normal, and the indications of a struggle were gradually disappearing. Using their seasoned eyes, Minato and Kakashi searched for any clue as to the kidnapper's intended destination. Heishi and Obito attempted to see something that was invisible to the human eye by using their respective Kekkei Genkai. They all failed to find anything. Minato looked at Kakashi and nodded without breaking the silence, and Kakashi understood right away what he meant. He made brief hand gestures and bit his thumb before slamming his right hand to the floor. He exclaimed, "Summoning Jutsu," as smoke enveloped him and writing scribbled to life around his hand. As it spread, Kakashi's 8 ninken showed up, submissive and prepared to take action. Kakashi looked at his ninken and observed their tense bodies. "As I've explained before, a member of our village has been taken," he said. "This is unacceptable. We need to find her and we need to find her now." Heishi whispered to Minato, "I can see why you chose him to lead an Anbu team. He has the qualities of a great leader," and Minato shrugged and grinned proudly. As he did so, Kakashi allowed each of the ninken to smell one of the ninja shoes that Heishi had given him. "When he's not being lazy," Minato continued. Kakashi sighed and muttered something under his breath. "When I said, fan out. If you find a scent, any scent, you let me know. Go." The ninken all barked at once and fled in a frantic scramble in 8 different directions. Kakashi grinned as he turned to face his friends, his eyes wrinkled. Kakashi said, "Now, we wait," and Minato gave a nod. "And catch our breath," Obito and Heishi said, nodding, and the four of them sat down to talk about potential outcomes and strategies before Minato gave a brief motivational speech. When the subject of women was brought up, the unmarried men began to make fun of the married men. At last, Kakashi heard his dogs howling softly, and he, his group, and the other ninken discovered their comrades sniffing in an unidentified spot. "Akino," said the dog as he glanced up at Kakashi through black sunglasses, "what did you find?" When Akino said, "I found a squirrel's home," everyone's perspiration stopped. "Wait, that's not why I called." "A male," Biscay declared after sniffing the ground close to Akino. The other ninken soon agreed with Biscay, following their example. "Exactly," Akino replied, gesturing toward the back. "The scent continues that way. There's also another scent, very faint. Almost didn't catch it." Heishi asked, trying to hide his concern, "Is it Hinata's?" Pakun gave Heishi a look. Pakun's response, "It's feminine, so chances are it is," appeared to calm Heishi, and he sighed in silence. Obito said, "Let's get going. We're losing daylight," and he jumped up and down. As he and his fellows began to follow the scent left behind, Kakashi gave the order, "Lead the way," and Akino nodded. Hiashi's knuckles were whitened and his fist was clenched. Saying, "Easy there," Minato placed a hand over Hiashi's left shoulder. "We'll find her." Heishi gave a nod and continued to follow the ninken. He would need to wait. Usually he was patient enough for anything. This time, though, he was having trouble being patient. He would need to get by with what he had.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.